Picture this. You are from a noble family and you've just been chosen to serve a medieval princess as a lady-in-waiting. Your parents are celebrating, your future seems bright, and everyone tells you how fortunate you are. But what they don't tell you is that you've just accepted the most precarious position in the entire medieval world. More dangerous than serving a queen, more unpredictable than court politics, and more likely to get you killed than any other role you could imagine. Welcome to the deadly world of surviving as a princess's lady-in-waiting, where your mistress could be married off to a foreign kingdom at any moment, where political alliances shifted with every treaty, and where your very survival depended on the whims of kings who saw princesses as nothing more than bargaining chips. This isn't the fairy tale version of princess life. This is the brutal reality of serving someone who had no real power, but all the enemies that came with royal blood. You weren't serving an established queen with her own court. You were serving a political pawn whose value could disappear overnight. The medieval world was unforgiving to women, but it was especially cruel to those who served princesses. Unlike queens, who had established power bases and permanent courts, princesses existed in a state of perpetual uncertainty. They could be betrothed as children, married off as teenagers, or sent to foreign courts as diplomatic hostages, and their ladies-in-waiting went with them into this dangerous unknown. Juan, the princess problem, serving a moving target. Unlike queens, who had established courts and permanent residences, medieval princesses were constantly moving. Your princess might be shuttled between castles, sent to potential suitors for inspections, or dispatched to foreign courts for marriage negotiations. This constant movement made survival exponentially more difficult. Every new location brought new enemies, new political dynamics, and new dangers. The servants who had protected you in one castle might be your enemies in the next. Princess households were smaller than royal courts, which meant fewer allies and less protection. While a queen might have hundreds of ladies-in-waiting, a princess often had only a dozen or fewer attendants. This intimacy could be an advantage, but it also meant that every conflict was personal and every enemy was close enough to destroy you. The worst part was that princesses themselves had limited power to protect their servants. They couldn't grant lands, arrange advantageous marriages, or offer the kind of permanent security that queens provided. Your princess might promise to reward your loyalty, but if she was married after a foreign kingdom, those promises became worthless. Medieval princesses lived under constant surveillance from their father's advisors, potential suitors, and foreign diplomats. This meant that everyone around the princess, including her ladies-in-waiting, was also being watched and evaluated. A single misstep could be reported back to the king, resulting in immediate dismissal or worse. Your princess might not even know who to trust. Surrounded by people placed by her father, potential mothers-in-law, and political advisors, she often couldn't tell which of her ladies-in-waiting were genuine allies and which were spies. This paranoia created an atmosphere where anyone could be sacrificed at any moment. The mobility of princess households also meant constant exposure to new diseases, unfamiliar foods, and dangerous travel conditions. Ladies-in-waiting who became ill during travels were often left behind, abandoned in foreign territories with no way to return home. Travel itself was a constant source of danger. Medieval roads were notorious for bandits who specifically targeted royal parties because of their obvious wealth. Princess households, being smaller and less protected than full royal courts, were particularly vulnerable to these attacks. Ladies-in-waiting might find themselves fighting for their lives, with weapons they barely knew how to use. The weather was another constant enemy. Medieval travel occurred in all seasons, regardless of conditions. Ladies-in-waiting had to endure freezing winters, sweltering summers, and torrential rains while maintaining their appearance and composure. Falling ill from exposure could mean being abandoned by the traveling party. Accommodation during travels was often primitive and dangerous. Princess households might stay in monasteries, noble houses, or even makeshift camps. Each location presented new security risks, new political complications, and new opportunities for enemies to strike. Ladies-in-waiting had to remain vigilant at all times, never knowing which seemingly friendly host might be plotting against their mistress. 2. The daily grind of uncertainty. Each day as a princess's lady-in-waiting began before dawn, with no guarantee of where you might end the day. Your morning routine had to be flexible enough to accommodate sudden travel orders, unexpected visitors, or dramatic changes in political circumstances. The first task was always assessing your princess's mood and the political climate. But overnight messengers brought news of war, marriage negotiations, or political upheaval. Was your princess anxious about potential suitors, angry about restrictions placed by her father, or excited about possible adventures? Reading these signs correctly could mean the difference between a peaceful day and a catastrophic one. Dressing a medieval princess was an elaborate process that could take hours. Unlike queens, who had established wardrobe protocols, princesses often had to dress according to rapidly changing political requirements. One day she might need to appear as a pious, modest daughter. The next, she might need to project wealth and sophistication for foreign ambassadors. As her lady-in-waiting, you had to understand these subtle political messages and choose clothing accordingly. The fabrics themselves told stories. Silk from the East suggested international connections. Wool from England showed patriotic loyalty. Collars had meanings, jewels conveyed messages, and even the style of sleeves could communicate political allegiances. Choose wrong, and you could accidentally insult allies or signal dangerous political positions. Hair arrangements were equally complex political statements. Different kingdoms favored different styles, and a princess's hairstyle needed to send the appropriate messages to whatever audience she might encounter that day. Ladies-in-waiting became expert hairdressers, learning to create elaborate braids, complex knots, and towering arrangements that could take years to complete. But the real challenge was managing your princess's education and entertainment while keeping her politically safe. Medieval princesses were expected to be accomplished in languages, music, dancing, and conversation. They needed to understand international politics, religious theology, and court etiquette. But too much knowledge could be dangerous, especially if it gave them ideas about independence or resistance to arranged marriages. Reading sessions were particularly treacherous. What books were appropriate for a princess to read? Religious texts were safe, but which religious texts? Romance literature was entertaining, but it might give her unrealistic ideas about marriage. Political treatises could be educational, but they might also inspire inconvenient questions about royal authority. Music lessons presented similar challenges. Certain songs had political meanings, particular instruments were associated with specific regions or religions, and musical choices could accidentally convey diplomatic messages. Ladies-in-waiting had to be musical scholars, understanding not just how to play instruments, but what each musical choice communicated to different audiences. 3. The marriage trap when your world disappears. The most terrifying moment in any princess's lady-in-waiting's career was when marriage negotiations began. Because medieval princesses were political assets, their marriages were arranged for maximum political advantage, not personal happiness. When your princess was promised in marriage, your entire world could disappear. Some princesses were allowed to take a few trusted ladies-in-waiting to their new kingdoms, but many were forced to leave their entire household behind. The ladies-in-waiting who weren't chosen for the foreign court found themselves suddenly unemployed in a world where their primary qualification was serving someone who no longer existed in their country. But being chosen to accompany your princess to a foreign court was often worse than being left behind. You would be traveling to a kingdom where you didn't speak the language, didn't understand the customs, and had no family connections to protect you. The foreign court would see you as a potential spy, a reminder of foreign influence, or simply an inconvenient leftover from the princess's old life. Foreign queens and their established ladies-in-waiting often viewed the princess's attendants as threats to their own positions. They would work to isolate the new princess from her trusted servants, forcing her to rely on local ladies-in-waiting who owed their loyalty to the new kingdom, not to her. Some princesses tried to maintain loyalty to their homeland, using their original ladies-in-waiting as secret communication channels with their fathers. This put the ladies-in-waiting in an impossible position. Refuse to carry messages and lose your princess's trust. Agree to spy for your old kingdom and risk execution for treason in your new one. The language barriers were particularly dangerous. Ladies-in-waiting who couldn't communicate effectively became liabilities rather than assets. They couldn't warn their princess about local political dangers, couldn't build alliances with local servants, and couldn't even perform basic duties like reading correspondence or managing social interactions. Even worse, foreign courts often had different standards for ladies-in-waiting. Behaviors that were acceptable in your home kingdom might be scandalous in a new court. Religious practices that were normal at home could be seen as heretical abroad. Fashion choices that showed proper rank at home might be interpreted as inappropriate display in a new kingdom. Marriage negotiations themselves were minefields for ladies-in-waiting. You had to be present during these delicate discussions, but any sign of interest in the proceedings could be interpreted as inappropriate curiosity. Show too much knowledge about the political implications, and you'd be seen as a spy. Show too little understanding, and you'd be dismissed as incompetent. The emotional toll on princesses during marriage negotiations was enormous, and ladies-in-waiting bore the brunt of their mistress's fears and anxieties. Princesses might lash out at their attendants, blame them for their circumstances, or become so depressed that they required constant supervision. The inspection process was particularly humiliating for everyone involved. Potential suitors or their representatives would examine the princess as if she were livestock being evaluated for purchase. Ladies-in-waiting had to maintain dignified composure while watching their mistress being subjected to this degrading process. Any visible reaction of disgust or anger could be reported back to the king and result in immediate dismissal. 4. The training ground for treachery. Serving a princess was like attending a school for political survival, except the curriculum could kill you. Princesses were often young, inexperienced, and emotionally volatile, making them unreliable sources of protection for their servants. Unlike queens, who had learned to control their emotions and manage court politics, princesses were still learning these skills. They might make impulsive decisions that destroyed their ladies-in-waiting's careers. They could fall in love with inappropriate suitors, creating scandals that tainted everyone around them. Or they might trust the wrong advisors, leading their entire household into political disasters. Young princesses were particularly dangerous to serve because they hadn't yet learned to separate personal feelings from political necessities. They might dismiss a loyal lady-in-waiting because of a personal argument, not understanding that this had signals about their judgment to the entire court. The educational requirements for serving a princess were often higher than those for serving a queen. You had to be prepared to travel to foreign courts, so you needed multiple languages. You had to understand international politics because your princess might be involved in complex diplomatic negotiations. You needed to know the customs of several different kingdoms because you never knew where you might end up. But this education made you dangerous in the eyes of other courtiers. Ladies-in-waiting who were too knowledgeable, too well-connected, or too influential could be seen as threats to established power structures. Kings might worry that educated ladies-in-waiting were teaching their daughters inappropriate independence. The constant proximity to international negotiations meant that princesses' ladies-in-waiting often knew state secrets that could determine the fate of kingdoms. They overheard marriage negotiations, military planning, and diplomatic strategies. This knowledge was valuable, but possessing it was often a death sentence. Some ladies-in-waiting tried to use their knowledge for personal advantage, selling information to foreign courts or rival noble families. But this was incredibly dangerous, because medieval intelligence networks were small and everyone eventually found out who was selling secrets. The training process for princesses' ladies-in-waiting was informal and deadly. Unlike queens' attendants, who had established protocols and experienced mentors, princesses' ladies-in-waiting often had to figure things out for themselves. Mistakes that would be corrected gently in a queen's court could result in immediate dismissal or worse in a princess's household. Languages were particularly crucial, but also particularly dangerous. A lady-in-waiting who spoke the language of a potential enemy kingdom might be suspected of disloyalty, but failing to learn the language of a kingdom your princess might marry into could make you useless when the time came. The physical training was equally demanding. Ladies-in-waiting had to learn to ride horses skillfully enough to keep up with royal hunting parties and military movements. They needed to understand basic medical care for times when professional physicians weren't available, and they had to master the complex dance steps and musical performances that were essential parts of court entertainment. 5. The hierarchy of helplessness. The social structure around a medieval princess was far more unstable than the established hierarchies of royal courts. Princess households had fewer layers of protection, less formal structure, and more opportunities for rapid rises and catastrophic falls. At the top of a princess's household, you might find a governess or chief lady-in-waiting, often an older woman appointed by the king. But unlike the established mistress of the robes in a queen's court, these positions were temporary and could be revoked at any moment. The king might decide his daughter needed different guidance, a potential suitor might object to certain attendance, or political circumstances might require complete household change. Below the chief attendant, the hierarchy was often fluid and competitive. Ladies-in-waiting jockeyed for position, knowing that favor with the princess could disappear as quickly as it appeared. There were fewer established protocols, fewer traditional privileges, and fewer protections for those who fell from favor. The instability of princess households meant that alliances were constantly shifting. A lady-in-waiting who was the princess's favorite one month might find herself completely excluded the next. These rapid changes made it almost impossible to build the long-term alliances that were essential for survival in more established courts. Competition between ladies-in-waiting was particularly vicious in princess households. With fewer positions available and less security for everyone, each woman saw others as direct threats to her survival. Friendships were rare, trust was almost non-existent, and betrayal was a daily occurrence. The princess's own inexperience made these hierarchical problems worse. Young princesses often played favorites, created arbitrary rules, and made decisions based on emotions rather than political wisdom. This unpredictability kept everyone in a constant state of anxiety. Some princesses deliberately encouraged competition among their ladies-in-waiting, believing this would ensure loyalty. They would promise special rewards, hint at future preferments, or suggest that certain servants would be chosen for foreign assignments. This manipulation created an atmosphere of constant tension and mutual suspicion. The age differences within princess households also created unique problems. Younger ladies-in-waiting might resent older, more experienced attendants who seemed to have the princess's ear. Older women might dismiss younger attendants as frivolous or incompetent. These generational conflicts were exploited by those seeking to advance their own positions. Regional loyalties complicated the hierarchy further. Ladies-in-waiting from different parts of the kingdom might form competing factions based on their home territories. These regional conflicts could become so intense that they paralyzed the entire household's ability to function effectively. 6. The foreign court nightmare. When your princess married into a foreign court, surviving the transition required skills that no amount of training could fully prepare you for. You were entering a completely hostile environment where everything from the language to the food to the religious practices could be different. The foreign queen would almost always see you as a threat. You represented the old kingdom, the old loyalties, and the old ways of doing things. Even if you had no political ambitions, your very presence reminded everyone that the new princess had once belonged to a different country. Local ladies-in-waiting viewed foreign attendants as competition for limited positions and royal favor. They would work to isolate you, spread rumors about your loyalty, and look for any excuse to have you sent home in disgrace. Making matters worse, you couldn't easily defend yourself because you didn't understand the local political dynamics. Language barriers made every interaction potentially dangerous. A misunderstood phrase could be interpreted as an insult. A mispronounced name could suggest disrespect. Even your accent marked you as an outsider who couldn't be trusted with local secrets. Religious differences were particularly treacherous. Medieval courts were deeply religious, and different kingdoms often had different theological emphases or favored different religious orders. Attending the wrong chapel, showing insufficient devotion to local saints, or maintaining religious practices from your homeland could all be seen as signs of disloyalty. Your princess herself became unreliable in foreign courts. Pressured to integrate into her new kingdom, she might distance herself from her original attendants to prove her loyalty to her new husband. The ladies-in-waiting who had served her faithfully for years could find themselves abandoned as she built relationships with local courtiers. Some foreign courts deliberately separated new princesses from their original attendants. They would assign the foreign ladies-in-waiting to impossible tasks, create conflicts between them and local servants, or simply make their lives so miserable that they would request to return home. The food differences could be literally deadly. Medieval cuisines varied dramatically between regions, and ladies-in-waiting who couldn't adapt to local foods often became ill. Some foreign courts deliberately served foods that newcomers couldn't digest as a way of encouraging them to leave. Climate differences added another layer of difficulty. A lady-in-waiting from northern kingdoms might struggle with southern heat, while someone from warmer climates could become dangerously ill in cold northern castles. Illness made you vulnerable and expendable. Legal systems in foreign kingdoms often provided no protection for foreign attendants. If you were accused of wrongdoing, you might have no legal recourse and no way to defend yourself. Local laws might not recognize your status as a noble, leaving you as vulnerable as a common servant. 7. The communication network of death. One of the most dangerous aspects of serving a princess was becoming part of the informal communication networks that connected medieval courts. Princesses were often expected to maintain relationships with their birth families, while also developing loyalty to their new kingdoms. Ladies-in-waiting became the secret channels for these communications. They carried messages between kingdoms, delivered gifts that had political meanings, and reported on their princesses' treatment in foreign courts. This intelligent work was essential for maintaining international relationships, but it was also incredibly dangerous. Medieval kingdoms employ extensive spy networks to monitor foreign courts. Ladies-in-waiting who carried messages were obvious targets for recruitment, blackmail, or elimination. Foreign intelligence agents would try to bribe them for information, threaten them for cooperation, or simply remove them as security risks. The coded language used in these communications required extensive knowledge and perfect memory. Ladies-in-waiting had to remember complex messages, understand subtle diplomatic references, and deliver information with perfect accuracy. A single mistake could start wars, destroy alliances, or get everyone involved executed for treason. Some ladies-in-waiting became double or triple agents, selling information to multiple kingdoms while trying to maintain their positions. This was an incredibly dangerous game that required exceptional skill and usually ended in discovery and death. The technology of medieval communication made these activities even more perilous. Written messages could be intercepted and decoded. Verbal messages could be overheard or misreported. Ladies-in-waiting often had to memorize sensitive information and destroy evidence of their activities. Foreign courts were constantly trying to intercept communications between princesses and their home kingdoms. They would search belongings, monitor conversations, and place spies among the princesses' attendants. Ladies-in-waiting who were caught carrying unauthorized messages faced imprisonment, torture, or execution. The emotional toll of carrying these secrets was enormous. Ladies-in-waiting lived in constant fear of discovery, unable to trust anyone completely. The stress of maintaining multiple loyalties and remembering complex information often led to mental breakdown. Some courts used torture to extract information from suspected messengers. Ladies-in-waiting were trained to resist questioning, but medieval torture techniques were designed to break anyone. Fear of torture was often worse than the actual experience. 8. The economics of uncertainty. The financial reality of serving a medieval princess was far more precarious than serving an established queen. Princesses had limited resources, unpredictable futures, and no guarantee that they could provide for their servants' long-term security. Unlike queens, who controlled substantial treasuries and could grant lands or permanent positions, princesses often operated on allowances from their fathers. These allowances could be reduced or eliminated based on political circumstances, leaving the entire household in financial jeopardy. When a princess married, her financial situation completely changed. Her new husband's family might provide a generous household budget, or they might restrict her spending to maintain control. Ladies-in-waiting had no way of knowing whether their financial security would improve or disappear after their princess's marriage. The constant travel required by princess households made personal financial management almost impossible. Ladies-in-waiting couldn't maintain property, build local business relationships, or invest in stable, long-term assets. Their wealth existed primarily in portable goods like jewelry, which could easily be stolen or lost during travels. Foreign assignments were particularly financially dangerous. The exchange rates between kingdoms were unpredictable, local prices were often inflated for foreigners, and ladies-in-waiting frequently found that their savings were worthless in new countries. Some princesses expected their ladies-in-waiting to contribute financially to household expenses. They might require attendants to provide their own clothing, pay for their own food during travels, or contribute to gifts for important political figures. These expectations could quickly bankrupt a lady-in-waiting's family. The lack of financial security made ladies-in-waiting vulnerable to bribes and corruption. Foreign agents would offer substantial payments for information or cooperation. Desperate servants might accept these offers, not understanding that they were signing their own death warrants. Clothing was a particular financial burden for princesses' ladies-in-waiting. You had to maintain an appearance appropriate to your rank and your princess's status, but you also had to be prepared for sudden changes in location or political circumstance. The cost of maintaining multiple wardrobes for different climates and coasts could be bankrupting. 9. The art of staying invisible. The key to survival as a princess's lady-in-waiting was mastering the delicate art of being essential without being threatening. You had to be valuable enough to keep, but not so influential that you became a target for elimination. This required constantly adjusting your behavior based on changing political circumstances. When your princess was being courted by potential suitors, you had to be charming enough to reflect well on her, but not so attractive that you became a distraction. During diplomatic negotiations, you had to be knowledgeable enough to be useful, but not so informed that you seemed like a spy. The most successful princesses ladies-in-waiting developed chameleon-like abilities to adapt to any situation. They could speak multiple languages, understand various cultural customs, and adjust their personalities to match what each new court required. But this constant adaptation was psychologically exhausting. Ladies-in-waiting who survived long careers often lost their own sense of identity. They became so skilled at being what others needed them to be that they forgot who they actually were. The social isolation was particularly brutal. Unable to trust other ladies-in-waiting, separated from family for years at a time, and constantly surrounded by potential enemies, princesses' attendants often developed severe emotional problems. Some ladies-in-waiting tried to maintain their sanity by keeping detailed private journals. But even this was dangerous because written records could be used as evidence against them. Others turned to religion, but excessive devotion could be seen as political statement. The successful survivors learned to find small pleasures in daily routines. They might develop expertise in music, needlework, or languages as ways to maintain their mental health while also making themselves more valuable. But perhaps most importantly, the best princesses ladies-in-waiting learned to think several moves ahead. They constantly evaluated potential escape routes, alternative career paths, and backup plans for when their current situation inevitably collapsed. They studied the political landscape, identified rising and falling noble families, and cultivated relationships that might provide future security. They saved money secretly, maintained connections with their home regions, and always had plans for what they would do if their princess died, married, or simply decided to replace them. The physical demands of the job were also enormous. Medieval princesses expected their ladies-in-waiting to be available at all hours, to travel in uncomfortable conditions, and to maintain perfect composure regardless of circumstances. The constant stress took a severe toll on health and appearance. Sleep was often impossible. Princesses ladies-in-waiting were expected to be ready to respond to their mistress's needs at any hour of the day or night. Some slept in the princess's chamber, which meant never having true privacy or rest. Others slept in nearby rooms, but had to be dressed and ready to appear at a moment's notice. 10. The ultimate survival game. Survival as a medieval princess's lady-in-waiting required the strategic thinking of a military commander, the diplomatic skills of an ambassador, and the adaptability of a traveling merchant. It was a career that demanded everything, promised nothing, and could end in triumph or disaster at any moment. Those brave enough to accept these positions lived lives of constant uncertainty, navigating a world where one wrong step could mean exile, disgrace, or death. But for the few who mastered this dangerous game, the rewards could be extraordinary. Access to international politics, influence over royal decisions, and the chance to shape the course of history itself. The medieval princess's lady-in-waiting was far more than a simple servant. She was a diplomat, spy, bodyguard, and political advisor, all rolled into one precarious position. And in a world where women had few opportunities for real power, these remarkable individuals found ways to survive and thrive in the most dangerous environment imaginable. Their stories remind us that survival, in any era, requires not just strength and courage, but also intelligence, adaptability, and the willingness to play by rules that others might find unthinkable. The medieval court was their battlefield, politics was their weapon, and survival was their ultimate victory. The successful ones learned to read people like books, understanding motivations and predicting behavior with uncanny accuracy. They became masters of the subtle art of influence, able to guide decisions without appearing to do so, and they developed an almost supernatural ability to sense danger before it materialized, allowing them to position themselves safely before disaster struck. But perhaps most remarkably, they maintained their humanity in an environment designed to strip it away. Despite the constant danger, the betrayals, and the emotional isolation, the best ladies-in-waiting found ways to show genuine care for their mistresses while protecting their own interests. They became experts at finding the narrow path between loyalty and survival, service and self-preservation. In the end, serving a medieval princess as a lady-in-waiting was the ultimate test of human adaptability and resilience. It required sacrificing personal desires for political necessity while maintaining enough individual strength to survive when those politics inevitably changed. Those who mastered this impossible balance became some of the most remarkable women in medieval history, their stories hidden behind the more famous tales of the princesses they served. 11. The code of survival: speaking without words. Medieval courts were places where words could kill you, but silence could be just as deadly. Ladies-in-waiting developed elaborate systems of nonverbal communication that allowed them to share vital information without ever speaking a word that could be used against them. A tap of a goblet could warn allies about incoming danger. A fold in a napkin might signal which nobles were planning something treacherous. The way you arranged your sleeves could communicate which foreign ambassadors were trustworthy and which were spies. These weren't casual gestures. They were carefully developed codes that took years to master, and could mean the difference between life and death. A lady-in-waiting who misread a signal might walk directly into a trap. One who failed to send a warning could watch her allies destroyed by enemies they never saw coming. The most sophisticated systems involved multiple layers of meaning. A single gesture might have different meanings depending on the time of day, the location, or who else was present. Only the most trusted allies were taught the complete code. And even then, different people knew different parts of the system. Some ladies-in-waiting became so skilled at this silent communication that they could conduct entire conversations across a crowded hall, without anyone else understanding what was happening. They developed the ability to coordinate complex political maneuvers, using nothing more than seemingly innocent adjustments to their clothing or casual movements of their hands. But these systems were also incredibly dangerous. If your enemies discovered your codes, they could use them against you. False signals could be sent to lure you into traps, or your own communication methods could be turned into evidence of treasonous plotting. The most paranoid ladies-in-waiting changed their codes frequently, sometimes daily. They would establish new meanings for gestures, create temporary signals for specific situations, and constantly adapt their communication methods to stay ahead of those who might be watching. Learning to read other people's signals was equally important. Every court had its own communication systems, and a lady-in-waiting who couldn't decode the local signals was essentially blind and deaf to the dangers around her. This was particularly crucial when traveling to foreign courts, where misunderstanding the local codes could result in accidentally insulting powerful people or missing warnings about imminent threats. The development of these codes often started with simple, practical needs. A princess might need to signal her ladies-in-waiting when she was bored during a diplomatic meeting, when she needed to visit the privy, or when she wanted to end a conversation. But these basic signals evolved into complex systems that could convey detailed information about political situations, personal dangers, and strategic opportunities. Musical codes were particularly sophisticated. A lady-in-waiting might hum a specific melody to indicate that certain people were trustworthy, or play particular notes on an instrument to warn about developing threats. These musical signals were nearly impossible for outsiders to detect because they seemed like normal entertainment activities. Fashion codes became equally elaborate. The way you wore your jewelry, the colors you chose for your clothing, even the style of your hair arrangement, could all carry coded messages. A particular brooch worn in a specific position might indicate your availability for secret meetings. A certain color combination could signal your loyalty to particular political factions. Religious gestures provided another layer of coded communication. The way you held your hands during prayer, which religious symbols you displayed, even how long you spent in chapel, could all convey information to those who understood the system. These religious codes were particularly valuable because they appeared to be expressions of piety rather than political communication. 12. The art of strategic positioning. In medieval courts, where you stood, where you sat, and even which direction you faced, could determine your survival. Ladies-in-waiting became masters of strategic positioning, using physical space as both shield and weapon in their daily battles for survival. The most basic rule was never to position yourself where you couldn't see potential threats. A lady-in-waiting who sat with her back to a room was vulnerable to attack from behind, but it was more complex than simple physical security. Your position in any space communicated your status, your alliances, and your intentions to everyone watching. Sitting too close to your princess could suggest you were trying to monopolize her attention. Sitting too far away might indicate you were falling from favor. The exact distance had to be calculated based on current political circumstances, recent events, and the other people present. During formal ceremonies, positioning became even more critical. The order of processions, seating arrangements at banquets, and standing positions during religious services all conveyed complex political messages. A lady-in-waiting who stood in the wrong place could accidentally claim a status she didn't have or suggest alliances that didn't exist. Some ladies-in-waiting developed reputations as masters of ceremonial positioning. They could read a room instantly, identifying the safest and most advantageous positions available. They understood the subtle hierarchies that determined who could stand where, and they used this knowledge to position themselves for maximum protection and influence. The most skilled practitioners could use positioning to communicate messages without speaking. By choosing specific locations, they could signal their loyalty to certain factions, indicate their availability for conversations, or warn others about potential dangers. A lady-in-waiting who positioned herself near a particular door might be indicating that she had escaped plans or that she expected trouble. But positioning was also about reading other people's intentions. A rival who suddenly changed her usual seating pattern might be planning something. Foreign dignitaries who positioned themselves in unexpected locations could be signaling political shifts or hidden agendas. The architecture of medieval palaces created additional positioning challenges. Rooms were designed with specific social hierarchies in mind, and understanding these architectural messages was crucial for survival. A lady-in-waiting who positioned herself inappropriately within a room's social geography could send unintended messages about her ambitions or loyalties. Windows, doorways, and fireplaces all had social meanings in medieval courts. Positioning yourself near a window might suggest you were watching for specific arrivals or departures. Standing near a doorway could indicate your readiness to leave quickly or your desire to intercept certain conversations. The fireplace was often the warmest and most comfortable location, but it was usually reserved for the highest-ranking people present. Temperature control through positioning became a subtle art form. The warmest spots in medieval rooms were highly coveted, especially during winter months. But claiming a warm position inappropriately could suggest you were putting personal comfort above social protocol. The most skilled ladies-in-waiting learned to position themselves where they could be warm while still maintaining appropriate social distance from their superiors. Lighting was another crucial positioning factor. In an era before electric lighting, position relative to candles, torches, and windows determined not only your ability to see what was happening, but also how clearly others could see you. Some ladies-in-waiting preferred to position themselves in shadows where they could observe without being closely scrutinized. Others chose well-lit positions to ensure their presence was noticed and acknowledged. 13. The psychology of fear and favor. Medieval courts operated on a complex psychology of fear and favor, where ladies-in-waiting had to constantly manage both emotions in themselves and others. Understanding and manipulating these psychological dynamics was essential for survival, but it was also one of the most dangerous skills to possess. Fear was a constant presence in medieval courts. Everyone was afraid of something. Nobles feared losing their lands and titles. Servants feared losing their positions, and ladies-in-waiting feared losing their lives. The key to survival was understanding exactly what each person feared most, and how that fear could be used to protect yourself or eliminate threats. Some ladies-in-waiting became experts at instilling fear in their enemies. They would carefully cultivate reputations as dangerous people to cross, spreading stories about their political connections, their access to damaging information, or their ability to influence their princess's decisions. The goal was to make potential enemies think twice before attacking, because the consequences might be too severe. But favor was equally important and far more difficult to manage. Royal favor could change in an instant, and a lady-in-waiting who had been in her princess's inner circle one day might find herself completely excluded the next. The key was to cultivate multiple sources of favor. so that losing one wouldn't mean complete destruction. The most successful ladies-in-waiting never allowed themselves to become completely dependent on their princess's favor. They built relationships with the other members of the royal family, established connections with powerful nobles, and maintained friendships with influential servants. This diversification of favor was like an insurance policy against sudden political changes. Managing your princess's psychology was perhaps the most delicate aspect of the job. Princesses were often young, emotionally unstable, and subject to enormous pressures. They might lash out at their ladies-in-waiting when they were frustrated about political situations they couldn't control. Learning to absorb this anger without taking it personally, while also finding ways to redirect their princess's emotions in healthy directions, required exceptional psychological skill. Some ladies-in-waiting became unofficial therapists for their princesses, learning to provide emotional support while maintaining appropriate boundaries. But this intimacy was dangerous, because princesses who shared too much with their attendants might later regret their openness and eliminate the witnesses to their vulnerability. The psychological pressure of constant surveillance was enormous. Ladies-in-waiting lived with the knowledge that their every action was being watched and evaluated. This constant scrutiny created a state of chronic stress that could lead to mental breakdown if not carefully managed. The most successful survivors learned techniques for maintaining their mental health while appearing perfectly composed. Fear management became a daily practice. Each morning, a lady-in-waiting had to assess the current fear levels of everyone around her, understanding who was feeling threatened, who was feeling confident, and how these emotional states might affect the day's interactions. This emotional intelligence was as important as political knowledge for survival. The most sophisticated practitioners learned to use fear as a tool without appearing threatening themselves. They might arrange for their enemies to receive anonymous warnings, create situations where dangerous people revealed their own threatening nature, or simply position themselves to benefit when fearful people made poor decisions. The key was to appear innocent while orchestrating events that served your interests. Favor cultivation required equally subtle skills. You couldn't appear to be seeking favor too obviously because that would make you seem desperate or manipulative. But you also couldn't be so subtle that your efforts went unnoticed. The best ladies-in-waiting learned to provide genuine value to those whose favor they sought, making themselves indispensable without appearing calculating. 14. The scandal machine when reputation becomes weapon. Medieval courts were scandal machines, constantly generating rumors, accusations, and character assassinations that could destroy lives in minutes. Ladies-in-waiting were both prime targets for these attacks and potential masters of scandal warfare. The most famous scandals involving ladies-in-waiting often centered around accusations of sexual impropriety. These accusations, whether true or false, could destroy a woman's reputation permanently. The mere suggestion of inappropriate behavior could result in immediate dismissal, social disgrace, and sometimes even execution. But scandal was also a weapon that could be used strategically. Ladies-in-waiting who mastered the art of scandal warfare could destroy their enemies by carefully planted rumors, strategic leaks of damaging information, or well-timed accusations. The key was to make the scandal seem credible while maintaining your own deniability. Catherine de Médicic's household provides a perfect example of scandal as political strategy. She maintained 80 ladies-in-waiting, whom she allegedly used as tools to seduce courtiers for political ends. They were known as her Flying Squadron, and their activities generated enormous scandal, but also gave Catherine unprecedented political influence. The most dangerous scandals were those that contained just enough truth to be believable. A lady-in-waiting who was known to have private conversations with foreign ambassadors might find herself accused of treason. One who was seen entering certain parts of the castle at odd hours could be accused of inappropriate relationships. Defending against scandal required constant vigilance and careful reputation management. Ladies-in-waiting learned to document their activities, maintain witnesses to their whereabouts, and cultivate relationships with people who could vouch for their character. Some even developed elaborate alibis for potentially compromising situations, ensuring they could prove their innocence if accusations arose. The timing of scandals was crucial. Accusations launched during politically sensitive periods were more likely to be believed and acted upon. A lady-in-waiting who was targeted just before her princess's marriage negotiations might find that even false accusations were treated as truth, because the political stakes were too high to risk any hint of impropriety. Some ladies-in-waiting became skilled at creating scandal shields, carefully cultivated reputations for moral rectitude that made them difficult targets for character assassination. They would publicly demonstrate their piety, chastity, and loyalty in ways that made accusations against them seem implausible. But this strategy required constant maintenance and could be undermined by a single mistake. The spread of scandal followed predictable patterns in medieval courts. Information usually traveled through servant networks, religious communities, and merchant connections. Understanding these communication channels allowed savvy ladies-in-waiting to either accelerate or suppress scandalous information as needed. Professional scandalmongers existed in most medieval courts. These were individuals who specialized in gathering and spreading damaging information for those willing to pay their prices. Ladies-in-waiting who could afford their services might hire them to attack enemies or defend themselves. But dealing with these individuals was extremely dangerous because they had no loyalty except to money. The economics of scandal were complex. Creating and spreading effective scandals required significant resources. You needed to pay informants, bribe servants, and sometimes hire professional rumor spreaders. But defending against scandals was often even more expensive, requiring legal fees, bribes to suppress information, and payments to character witnesses. Religious scandals were particularly devastating in medieval courts. Accusations of heresy, witchcraft, or moral failing could destroy not only the accused person, but their entire family. These religious scandals were often politically motivated, but they were presented as moral issues, making them difficult to defend against using normal political tactics. 13. The intelligence network. Information is currency. In medieval courts, information was the most valuable currency, and ladies-in-waiting were perfectly positioned to gather, trade, and weaponize intelligence. They had access to private conversations, personal documents, and intimate moments that revealed the true intentions and vulnerabilities of powerful people. The most successful ladies-in-waiting developed extensive intelligence networks, with contacts throughout the court hierarchy. They cultivated relationships with servants who overheard conversations, guards who saw unusual activities, and merchants who brought news from other kingdoms. These networks allowed them to stay informed about developing threats and emerging opportunities. But gathering intelligence was only the first step. The real skill was in knowing how to use information strategically. A well-timed revelation could destroy an enemy, protect an ally, or advance your own interests. But poorly timed or inappropriately shared intelligence could make you a target for elimination. Some ladies-in-waiting became professional spies, selling information to multiple parties while maintaining their official positions. This was incredibly dangerous work that required exceptional skill in compartmentalizing information and managing multiple loyalties. Discovery usually meant death, but the rewards could be enormous. The most valuable intelligence often concerned personal secrets rather than political information. Knowing about hidden relationships, financial problems, or family scandals could provide leverage over powerful people. A lady-in-waiting who discovered that a noble was having an affair might use the information to gain protection, advance her family's interests, or eliminate threats. Counterintelligence was equally important. Ladies-in-waiting had to assume that their enemies were trying to gather information about them, and they developed elaborate strategies for protecting their own secrets. Some used false information to test the loyalty of their contacts, while others created multiple versions of sensitive stories to identify leaks in their networks. Physical aspects of intelligence gathering required careful planning. Ladies-in-waiting learned to position themselves where they could overhear important conversations, to read documents quickly when opportunities arose, and to memorize information without appearing to pay attention. They developed techniques for searching rooms discreetly, copying documents without detection, and extracting information from unwilling sources. Memory became a crucial skill for intelligence operatives. Without the ability to write down sensitive information, ladies-in-waiting had to develop extraordinary memory techniques. Some used mnemonic devices. Others created mental maps of information, and the most skilled could recall complex conversations word for word months after hearing them. Code breaking became an essential intelligence skill. Medieval courts used various encryption methods for sensitive communications, and ladies-in-waiting who could decode these messages had access to incredibly valuable information. Some became so skilled at code breaking that they could read encrypted documents faster than the intended recipients. The intelligence marketplace was complex and dangerous. Information brokers operated in most courts, buying and selling secrets to the highest bidders. Ladies-in-waiting who entered this marketplace had to be extremely careful, because the same broker who sold them valuable intelligence today might sell information about their activities to enemies tomorrow. International intelligence was particularly valuable and dangerous. Information about foreign kingdoms, military preparations, and diplomatic negotiations could be worth enormous sums, but possessing this type of intelligence also made you a target for foreign agents, who might try to recruit you, silence you, or eliminate you as a security risk. 16. The betrayal business when allies become enemies. In the world of medieval court politics, betrayal wasn't just a possibility, it was an inevitability. Ladies-in-waiting lived in a world where today's closest ally could be tomorrow's deadliest enemy, and survival required mastering the complex art of betrayal management. The most dangerous betrayals often came from those closest to you. A fellow lady-in-waiting who shared your confidences might sell your secrets to advance her own position. A servant you trusted might be reporting your activities to your enemies. Even family members might betray you if the political pressures became too intense. Medieval women faced betrayal on multiple levels simultaneously. They could be betrayed by families who cared more about political alliances than their well-being, by lovers who abandoned them when relationships became politically inconvenient, and by society itself through gossip and character assassination. The most sophisticated ladies-in-waiting learned to anticipate and prepare for betrayal. They never shared complete information with any single person, maintained multiple backup plans for every situation, and cultivated relationships that could survive political changes. Some even arranged for automatic revenge mechanisms, ensuring that anyone who betrayed them would face consequences. But betrayal was also a tool that could be used strategically. A lady-in-waiting who discovered that an ally was planning to betray her might betray them first to protect herself. The key was timing and positioning, making sure that your betrayal was seen as justified self-defense rather than treacherous opportunism. The emotional toll of constant betrayal was enormous. Ladies-in-waiting who survived long careers often became incapable of genuine trust, viewing every relationship as a potential threat. They developed psychological defense mechanisms that allowed them to function in environments where betrayal was normal. But these same mechanisms often left them isolated and emotionally damaged. Some ladies-in-waiting became masters of betrayal theater. Elaborate performances designed to make their betrayal seem justified or necessary. They would create situations where their victims appeared to be the aggressors, where they would time their betrayals to coincide with larger political events that provided cover for their actions. The economics of betrayal were complex. The value of betraying someone had to be weighed against the long-term costs of being known as untrustworthy. Some betrayals paid immediate dividends, but destroyed future opportunities, while others seemed costly in the short term, but provided long-term strategic advantages. Betrayal documentation became a survival technique. Some ladies-in-waiting kept detailed records of who had betrayed whom, when, and under what circumstances. This information could be used to predict future betrayals, identify trustworthy allies, or provide evidence when accusations of disloyalty arose. The timing of betrayals was crucial for both perpetrators and victims. Betrayal executed at the right moment could be devastatingly effective, while one poorly timed could backfire spectacularly. The most skilled practitioners learned to read political situations accurately enough to time their betrayals for maximum impact and minimum risk. Recovery from betrayal became an essential skill. Ladies-in-waiting who couldn't bounce back from being betrayed were doomed to eventual destruction. The most resilient survivors learned to view betrayal as a cost of doing business. They developed techniques for minimizing the damage, rebuilding their networks, and sometimes even turning betrayal to their advantage. 17. The medical minefield. Health as vulnerability. Medieval medicine was primitive and dangerous. But for ladies-in-waiting, medical issues created additional layers of vulnerability that went far beyond physical health. Any sign of illness could be interpreted as political weakness, divine punishment, or evidence of moral failing. Pregnancy was particularly dangerous for unmarried ladies-in-waiting. Any suspicion of pregnancy could result in immediate dismissal, social disgrace, and sometimes execution. Some women went to extraordinary lengths to conceal pregnancies, using herbal remedies to prevent conception or terminate unwanted pregnancies. Others arranged for secret births and hidden adoptions to protect their reputations. Mental health issues were even more dangerous than physical ones. A lady-in-waiting who showed signs of emotional instability might be seen as a security risk. Depression, anxiety, or other mental health problems could be interpreted as evidence of guilt, disloyalty, or divine displeasure. Some ladies-in-waiting used medical knowledge as a weapon. They learned about poisons that could cause illness or death, herbs that could affect mood and behavior, and techniques for appearing sick when it was politically advantageous. This knowledge was dangerous to possess, because it could be used as evidence of treasonous intent. The medieval understanding of women's health was particularly problematic. Any unexplained illness might be attributed to witchcraft, moral failing, or divine punishment. Ladies-in-waiting had to be extremely careful about how they presented any health issues, ensuring that their symptoms couldn't be misinterpreted as evidence of inappropriate behavior. Menstruation created monthly challenges for medieval ladies-in-waiting. The medieval understanding of women's cycles was mixed with superstition and religious taboos. Some courts had specific protocols for managing menstrual periods, while others treated them as shameful secrets that had to be hidden at all costs. Childbirth was both dangerous and politically significant for married ladies-in-waiting. Successful pregnancies could enhance your status, but difficult births or infant deaths might be seen as signs of divine displeasure. Some women were forced to continue working even during advanced pregnancies, risking their health to maintain their positions. The role of ladies-in-waiting in caring for their princesses' health created additional complications. They might be present during medical examinations, privy to information about royal pregnancies, or responsible for administering medications. This medical knowledge made them valuable but also dangerous, because they could potentially harm their mistresses or reveal embarrassing health information. Medieval remedies were often more dangerous than the conditions they were meant to treat. Ladies-in-waiting who administered these treatments took enormous risks. If the treatment failed or caused harm, they might be blamed for incompetence or malicious intent. But refusing to provide medical care when requested could also result in punishment. Epidemic diseases posed particular challenges for court ladies-in-waiting. They were expected to continue serving their mistresses even during plague outbreaks. This meant constant exposure to deadly diseases, with little protection beyond prayers and folk remedies. Many ladies-in-waiting died from diseases contracted while performing their duties. The psychological toll of constant health anxiety was enormous. Ladies-in-waiting lived with the knowledge that any sign of illness, mental distress, or even normal bodily functions could be used against them. This created a state of chronic stress that ironically made them more vulnerable to the very health problems they feared. 18. The escape artists, exit strategies, and safe houses. The smartest ladies-in-waiting always had escape plans, because they understood that even the most careful survival strategies could fail. These weren't simple plans to leave the court, but complex systems for disappearing completely when necessary. Some maintained secret identities in distant regions, complete with alternative family histories and hidden resources. Others cultivated relationships with religious institutions that could provide sanctuary if they needed to disappear quickly. The most sophisticated even arranged for false deaths, allowing them to vanish completely while making it appear that they had died naturally. Medieval convents were popular escape destinations, but they were safe havens. Many convents were politically connected, and a lady-in-waiting who fled to the wrong religious house might find herself in even greater danger. The smart ones researched convents carefully, identifying those that were politically neutral and had histories of protecting refugees. Some ladies-in-waiting maintained networks of safe houses throughout various kingdoms, places where they could hide while arranging more permanent escapes. These might include merchant families who owed them favors, minor nobles who had reasons to oppose the current power structure, or even foreign courts that might grant asylum. The timing of escapes was crucial. A lady-in-waiting who fled too early might sacrifice a position that could have been saved. One who waited too long might find herself trapped by enemies who had anticipated her escape plans. Reading the political situation accurately enough to time an escape perfectly required exceptional skill and nerve. Emergency escape plans required careful preparation. Ladies-in-waiting who expected trouble might arrange for horses to be available at specific locations, hide money and valuables in strategic places, or establish code words with trusted allies who could help them flee. Some even practiced escape routes during normal activities, timing how long it would take to reach safety from various locations in the palace. The most elaborate escape plans involved multiple stages and alternative routes. A lady-in-waiting might have a primary escape route, 2 backup routes, and several contingency plans for different types of threats. These complex systems required constant maintenance and updating as political situations changed. International escapes were the most complex, but also potentially the most effective. A lady-in-waiting who could reach a foreign kingdom might be beyond the reach of her enemies, but international escapes require extensive preparation, including learning foreign languages, establishing contacts in other countries, and understanding international political relationships. Religious sanctuaries provided another escape option, or they came with their own risks. Convents and monasteries traditionally offered protection to those seeking refuge, but many religious institutions had political connections that could make them unsafe for certain fugitives. The smartest escape artists researched religious houses carefully, identifying those that were truly neutral and had histories of protecting refugees regardless of political circumstances. 19. The family factor: blood ties and political chains. Family relationships created both opportunities and vulnerabilities for ladies-in-waiting, often simultaneously. Your family connections might have secured your position, but they could also destroy you if political circumstances changed. The most dangerous situation was when your family's political fortunes declined while you were still serving at court. A lady-in-waiting whose father fell from royal favor might find herself automatically suspected of disloyalty. Her every action would be scrutinized for signs of treasonous intent, and her position could become untenable, regardless of her personal behavior. The case of Francisca de Silva perfectly illustrates how family loyalty could transcend generations and even continents. She served as a lady-in-waiting to Catherine of Aragon when the Spanish princess first arrived in England in 1501. Even after returning to Spain, Francisca never forgot the mistreatment her mistress suffered at the hands of Henry Roman VIII. Her son, Diego Hurtado de Mendoza, became a Spanish royal advisor. In 1536, when he heard news of Anne Boleyn's execution, he wrote savagely that no punishment could descend upon Henry Roman VIII that wouldn't make him happy. This demonstrates how a lady-in-waiting's experiences could influence international politics for decades. The rage against Henry Roman VIII became part of their family's story and affected Spanish royal policy through Mendoza's influence. But family connections could also provide crucial support networks. Ladies-in-waiting with powerful relatives had access to resources, information, and protection that others lacked. They could call on family members for financial support, political intervention, or emergency assistance when needed. The key was maintaining the right balance of family loyalty and personal independence. A lady-in-waiting who was seen as merely an extension of her family's political interests would never be trusted with sensitive information or given real responsibility. But one who appeared to have completely abandoned her family loyalties might be seen as fundamentally untrustworthy. Some families used their daughters' positions as ladies-in-waiting as intelligence-gathering operations. These women were expected to report back on court activities, royal plans, and political development. This created enormous stress because they had to balance their family obligations with their duties to the princess and their own survival needs. Marriage decisions were particularly complex for ladies-in-waiting from powerful families. Their marriages were often arranged to advance family political interests, but these same marriages could create conflicts with their court duties. A lady-in-waiting who married into an enemy family might find her position at court compromised, while one who refused a politically advantageous marriage might lose family support. Jeu de Court provides numerous examples of how family connections could both elevate and destroy ladies-in-waiting. Margaret Lee served as a lady of the Privy Chamber to Anne Boleyn, likely chosen because of family connections that suggested loyalty. Similarly, Elizabeth Seymour served Jane Seymour, presumably because their family relationship ensured trustworthiness. Brothers and male relatives could be both assets and liabilities for ladies-in-waiting. A brother who advanced in royal service could provide protection and opportunities, but a brother who fell from favor or committed treason could destroy his sister's career through association. The most politically savvy ladies-in-waiting maintained some distance from their male relatives to avoid guilt by association. Extended family networks could provide escape routes and alternative career paths. Ladies-in-waiting who maintained good relationships with cousins, uncles, and other relatives had more options if their court positions became untenable. These family connections could provide temporary shelter, financial support, or entry to other noble households. 20. The economic warfare, money as power and weapon. Medieval court life was an economic battlefield, where ladies-in-waiting had to master financial survival techniques that went far beyond simple budgeting. Money was both shield and sword in the deadly games of court politics, and understanding economic warfare was essential for long-term survival. The most basic financial survival technique was diversification. Smart ladies-in-waiting never put all their resources in one place. They might maintain accounts with multiple merchant families, hide valuables in several different locations, and cultivate financial relationships with people in various kingdoms. This financial diversification protected them against sudden political changes that could freeze or confiscate their assets. Many ladies-in-waiting received no official compensation for their work. They were understood to have taken the office solely to gain social and political capital. This made personal financial management even more crucial because they had to support themselves while serving without pay. But medieval ladies-in-waiting also had to understand how to use money as a weapon against their enemies. A well-timed loan could create obligations that provided protection. Strategic investments could give you influence over important people, and carefully placed bribes could eliminate threats before they became dangerous. The case of Jane Drummond, Countess of Roxbroke, shows how financial incentives could create dangerous complications. She served as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Anne, wife of James I. From 1603 to 1617, she was paid by Spain to influence the Queen in their direction. This dual loyalty created enormous risks, but also provided significant financial rewards. The most sophisticated financial warriors learned to manipulate debt relationships for political advantage. If you could get your enemies into debt to you or to your allies, you had leverage over their future actions. Some ladies-in-waiting became informal bankers, lending money to nobles who needed funds for political activities, marriages, or military campaigns. Currency exchange provided another battlefield for economic warfare. Medieval Europe had dozens of different currencies, and exchange rates fluctuated based on political events. Ladies-in-waiting who understood these currency markets could profit from political instability, while also protecting their own wealth from devaluation. The luxury goods trade was particularly important for ladies-in-waiting engaged in economic warfare. Expensive items like jewelry, fine fabrics, and rare spices could be easily transported. They held their value across currencies, and could be used as bribes or diplomatic gifts. Some ladies-in-waiting became expert traders in luxury goods, using their court connections to identify profitable opportunities. Edward Roman III and Queen Philippa demonstrate how trusted ladies-in-waiting could be given significant financial responsibilities. They chose the Queen's Lady Catherine de Foxteth to deliver funds to one of their scholarship students at Cambridge. This shows the level of financial trust that could be placed in reliable attendants. But economic warfare also involved defensive strategies to protect against financial attacks. Enemies might try to bankrupt you by flooding the market with competing goods, bribing your business partners to break contracts, or spreading rumors that damaged your financial reputation. The most successful financial survivors learned to anticipate these attacks and develop countermeasures. Tax avoidance became a survival skill for ladies-in-waiting whose wealth made them targets. Medieval tax systems were complex and often arbitrary, and a sudden tax assessment could destroy years of careful financial planning. Smart ladies-in-waiting learned to hide their wealth, spread it across jurisdictions, or structure their holdings in ways that minimized tax exposure. The economics of favor required careful calculation. Everything at court had a price, from information to protection to advancement opportunities. Ladies-in-waiting had to understand these informal price systems and budget accordingly. They needed to know when to pay for advantages, when to trade favors instead of money, and when to invest in long-term relationships rather than immediate benefits. 21. The religious shield. Faith is protection and weapon. Religion provided both protection and weaponry for medieval ladies-in-waiting, but using faith strategically required sophisticated understanding of theological politics. The medieval church was not monolithic, and different religious orders, theological positions, and spiritual practices carried different political meanings. The most basic religious survival strategy was demonstrating appropriate piety without appearing fanatical. Ladies-in-waiting had to show sufficient devotion to avoid accusations of heresy or moral failing, but not so much religious enthusiasm that they seemed to be criticizing the spiritual adequacy of others. This balance required careful observation of local religious customs and political preferences. The Tudor period provides stark examples of how religious changes could destroy ladies-in-waiting who chose the wrong side. Henry VIII's break with Rome created religious divisions on a previously inconceivable scale. Ladies-in-waiting had to navigate not only changing monarchs, but changing religions. Those who remained too loyal to Catholic practices could find themselves accused of treason, while those who embraced Protestant reforms too enthusiastically might be seen as dangerous radicals. Some ladies-in-waiting became experts at using religious observances to communicate political messages. The choice of which saints to honor, which religious festivals to attend, and which theological interpretations to support could all signal political loyalties without appearing to do so. A lady-in-waiting who emphasized devotion to saints associated with particular regions or political causes could communicate her allegiances to those who understood the religious code. Religious institutions provided potential sanctuary for ladies-in-waiting in desperate situations, but not all religious houses were politically neutral. Some convents and monasteries had strong connections to particular noble families or political factions. A lady-in-waiting seeking religious sanctuary had to research carefully, to identify institutions that would protect her, rather than deliver her to enemies. The case of Catherine of Aragon's ladies-in-waiting during the divorce crisis shows how religious loyalty could become a form of resistance. These women spied for their mistress, risking disgrace and even death. They viewed their loyalty to Catherine as both a personal duty and a religious obligation, since they believed Henry's attempt to annul his marriage was sinful. The most sophisticated religious strategists learned to use theological arguments as political weapons. Medieval theology provided extensive frameworks for discussing authority, obedience, justice, and moral behavior. A lady-in-waiting who could frame her political positions in theological terms might gain support from religious authorities and moral legitimacy for her actions. But religious warfare also involved defensive strategies against spiritual attacks. Enemies might accuse you of heresy, witchcraft, or moral failing, using religious language to destroy your reputation and eliminate you as a threat. The most successful spiritual survivors learned to anticipate these attacks and develop theological countermeasures. Pilgrimage provided both spiritual protection and practical escape opportunities for ladies-in-waiting. A strategic pilgrimage could remove you from immediate dangers, provide opportunities to build new political alliances, and demonstrate your piety to potential critics. Some ladies-in-waiting used extended pilgrimages as covers for intelligence gathering or political negotiations. Religious education became a weapon in the spiritual warfare of medieval courts. Ladies-in-waiting who could quote scripture, understand theological debates, and participate in religious discussions had additional tools for building alliances and defending against attacks. But religious learning also made you potentially dangerous to those who preferred their subjects ignorant. 22. The international network diplomacy as survival strategy. Medieval Europe was an interconnected web of kingdoms, duchies, and city-states, and the most successful ladies-in-waiting built international networks that provided protection and opportunities beyond their immediate courts. These international connections became increasingly important as political situations changed and domestic protections proved inadequate. The most basic international survival strategy was maintaining correspondences with ladies-in-waiting in other courts. These women faced similar challenges and could provide warnings about political developments, information about potential escape routes, and emotional support during difficult times. Some of these international networks became so extensive that they functioned as informal intelligence services. The story of Alice Burroughs illustrates how international connections could provide both opportunities and dangers. In the early 1360s, she entered the service of Queen Philippa of Hainault, but her international background and connections eventually became sources of suspicion and political vulnerability. Language skills were essential for building international networks. Ladies-in-waiting who spoke multiple languages could communicate with a wider range of contacts, understand foreign political developments, and position themselves as valuable translators and cultural interpreters. Some became so skilled at languages that they could detect subtle political meanings in foreign correspondences that others missed. Jane Drummond's case demonstrates the complex loyalties that international networking could create. As a lady-in-waiting to Queen Anne, she had access to sensitive English political information, but her willingness to accept payment from Spain to influence the Queen shows how international connections could create conflicting allegiances. Cultural knowledge provided another layer of international networking capability. Understanding foreign customs, religious practices, and social protocols allowed ladies-in-waiting to build relationships with visitors from other kingdoms. These relationships could provide future opportunities if political circumstances made international escape necessary. Some ladies-in-waiting became informal ambassadors, carrying messages between courts and facilitating diplomatic relationships. This was dangerous work that required exceptional discretion and political skill, but it could provide enormous influence and protection. Ladies-in-waiting who proved reliable in diplomatic roles might find themselves protected by multiple kingdoms. The informal nature of these diplomatic activities made them both valuable and dangerous. Ladies-in-waiting could gather information and influence opinions in ways that formal ambassadors could not. But this same informality meant they had little legal protection if their activities were discovered. Trade relationships provided practical foundations for international networks. Ladies-in-waiting who understood international commerce could build business relationships that provided both financial opportunities and political connections. Merchant networks often extended across political boundaries and could provide communication channels and escape routes when official diplomatic relationships failed. Marriage alliances created the most permanent international connections, but also the most complex obligations. A lady-in-waiting who married into a foreign noble family gained new protections and opportunities, but also new enemies and responsibilities. These international marriages had to be carefully calculated to provide maximum benefit while minimizing dangerous obligations. 23. The violent equation: physical survival in brutal times. Medieval courts were dangerous places where violence was always a possibility, and ladies-in-waiting had to develop strategies for physical survival that went far beyond simply avoiding dangerous situations. The threat of violence was constant, and preparation for physical confrontation was as important as political maneuvering. The execution of Anne Boleyn and the imprisonment of her ladies-in-waiting provides a stark reminder of how quickly court violence could escalate. Anne's ladies were not just witnesses to her alleged adultery, they were implicated in it. Some were imprisoned in the Tower of London, and their testimonies were used to condemn their mistress. This shows how proximity to power could become proximity to deadly danger. The most basic physical survival skill was situational awareness. Ladies-in-waiting had to constantly assess their surroundings for potential threats, identify escape routes, and recognize the warning signs that violence was imminent. This required developing almost supernatural sensitivity to changes in mood, body language, and environmental factors. Some ladies-in-waiting learned basic fighting skills, though this had to be done secretly because martial training was generally forbidden to women. They might learn knife fighting, how to use household items as weapons, or techniques for escaping from physical restraints. The most skilled developed reputations as dangerous opponents, which could deter some attacks. Poison was a constant threat in medieval courts, and ladies-in-waiting had to develop sophisticated strategies for avoiding it. This included learning to recognize the symptoms of various poisons, understanding which foods and drinks were most likely to be contaminated, and developing networks of trusted food tasters. Some became experts at detecting poison themselves, using techniques passed down through generations of court survivors. The case of Catherine of Aragon's ladies demonstrates how physical courage could become a form of political resistance. During the divorce crisis, these women risked not just social disgrace, but physical punishment by spying for their mistress. They understood that their activities could result in imprisonment, torture, or execution, yet they continued their dangerous work. Bodyguard networks provided another layer of physical protection. Ladies in waiting who could afford it might hire personal guards, but more commonly they developed informal protection networks with servants, guards, and other courtiers who had reasons to keep them safe. These protection networks require careful maintenance and could be dangerous if they included unreliable people. The most sophisticated physical survivors learned to use architecture for protection. They understood which rooms in the palace were safest, which corridors provided the best escape routes, and had to position themselves for maximum security during dangerous times. Some even arranged for secret passages or hidden chambers that could provide emergency shelter. At Anne Boleyn's coronation, her ladies had to be prepared for the possibility of crowd violence. They positioned themselves to protect their mistress from any threats, while also performing ceremonial duties like holding cloths when she needed to spit. This dual role of protection and service was typical of the complex responsibilities ladies-in-waiting faced. Medical knowledge became a survival skill for ladies-in-waiting who might be injured in violent encounters. Learning basic wound care, understanding which herbs could treat injuries, and knowing how to set broken bones could mean the difference between life and death. Some ladies-in-waiting became skilled enough to serve as battlefield medics during conflicts. 24. The psychological arsenal advanced mental survival techniques. Surviving as a medieval princess's lady-in-waiting required not just political skill and physical courage, but also exceptional psychological resilience. The mental pressures of court life could destroy even the most carefully prepared individuals, and developing advanced psychological survival techniques was essential for long-term success. The case of the ladies-in-waiting who served Henry Roman VIII's 6 wives illustrates the psychological toll of court service. These women had to watch their mistresses rise and fall, sometimes ending in divorce, sometimes in execution. They had to adapt to rapid changes in royal favor, religious policy, and political alliances. The psychological flexibility required to survive these constant upheavals was extraordinary. The most basic psychological survival skill was compartmentalization. Ladies-in-waiting had to learn to separate their public personas from their private selves, their professional duties from their personal feelings, and their immediate concerns from their long-term goals. This mental compartmentalization protected them from the emotional damage of constant betrayal and violence. Emotional regulation became a daily practice for successful court survivors. They had to learn to control their facial expressions, voice tone, and body language regardless of their internal emotional state. This required developing techniques for managing fear, anger, sadness, and even joy, because any uncontrolled emotional display could be used against them. The hierarchical structure of Tudor ladies-in-waiting created additional psychological pressures. The mistress of the robes held authority over all other female courtiers. Below her were the ladies of the bedchamber, typically wives or widows of high-ranking peers. Then came the women of the bedchamber, usually daughters of peers. Finally, the maids of honor completed the hierarchy. Each level had different privileges and responsibilities, but also different vulnerabilities and psychological stresses. Some ladies-in-waiting became masters of psychological manipulation, learning to influence others through careful emotional appeals. They studied human psychology, understood what motivated different types of people, and developed techniques for encouraging desired behaviors in others. This psychological manipulation could be used defensively to protect themselves or offensively to eliminate threats. Memory techniques were crucial for ladies-in-waiting who had to remember vast amounts of sensitive information without writing anything down. They developed sophisticated systems for organizing and recalling information, using techniques borrowed from scholars, merchants, and other professionals who relied on memory. Some could recall conversations word for word, months or even years after hearing them. The psychological impact of religious changes during the Tudor period created additional mental health challenges. Ladies-in-waiting had to adapt not just to new monarchs, but to new religious practices, new theological requirements, and new definitions of loyalty and treason. The mental flexibility required to navigate these religious upheavals while maintaining psychological stability was enormous. Stress management became essential for surviving the chronic pressure of court life. Ladies-in-waiting developed techniques for maintaining their mental health despite constant danger, uncertainty, and betrayal. This might include meditation practices, physical exercise routines, or creative activities that provided emotional release. 25. The legacy game planning for succession and survival beyond death. The smartest ladies-in-waiting understood that their survival strategies had to extend beyond their own lifetimes, and they developed sophisticated legacy planning techniques to protect their families and continue their influence even after death. This long-term thinking separated the truly successful from those who merely survived day to day. The story of Francisca de Silva and her son Diego Hurtado de Mendoza shows how a lady-in-waiting's legacy could influence international politics for generations. Francisca's experience as serving Catherine of Aragon created a family hatred of Henry Roman VIII that affected Spanish royal policy decades later. Her son, as a Spanish royal advisor, carried his mother's indignation into the highest levels of government. The most basic legacy strategy was documentation. Despite the dangers of written records, some ladies-in-waiting kept careful documentation of their activities, relationships, and knowledge. These records were hidden carefully and designed to be discovered only by trusted allies or family members after their deaths. Such documentation could provide evidence of loyalty, reveal enemy conspiracies, or offer guidance to successors. Protestant writer John Foxe actively sought out former ladies-in-waiting as sources for his famous Book of Martyrs during Elizabeth's reign. This shows how the testimonies and memories of these women became valuable historical sources. Ladies-in-waiting who had witnessed important events could shape how history was recorded and remembered. Some ladies-in-waiting became mentors to younger women entering court service, passing on survival techniques and building networks that would continue after their deaths. These mentoring relationships were carefully structured to provide mutual benefit, while also creating lasting alliances. The most successful mentors built extensive networks of former proteges who could provide support and protection. Financial legacy planning became increasingly sophisticated among the most successful ladies-in-waiting. They arranged for trusts, established business relationships that would benefit their children, and created financial networks that could provide long-term security for their families. Some even arranged for posthumous payments to allies who continued to protect their interests after their deaths. Information management was a crucial aspect of legacy planning. Ladies-in-waiting had to decide which secrets would die with them, which should be revealed posthumously for maximum political impact, and which should be passed on to successors. Some arranged for delayed revelation of sensitive information, using their deaths as timing mechanisms for political bombshells. The hierarchical organization that developed during the Tudor period created formal structures that could preserve institutional knowledge. The positions of Mistress of the Robes, Ladies of the Bedchamber, Women of the Bedchamber, and Maids of Honor created a system where experienced women could train newcomers and pass on survival techniques. The most sophisticated legacy planners arranged for their own mythologization. They carefully crafted stories about their lives that would enhance their reputations and provide protection for their families after their deaths. These carefully constructed legends could provide political influence that lasted for generations. 26. The ultimate mastery transcending the game itself. The most extraordinary ladies-in-waiting eventually transcended the survival game entirely, becoming so skilled at court politics that they operated on a level beyond mere survival. They moved from being pawns in political games to becoming players who influenced the rules themselves. 4 ladies-in-waiting actually became queens of England, ensuring the ultimate success possible in this dangerous career. But this advancement came at enormous risk. 2 of those ladies ended up with their heads in the block, demonstrating that even the highest success could lead to the ultimate failure. These masters of court survival developed reputations that protected them more effectively than any alliance or strategy. They became known as individuals too valuable to eliminate, too dangerous to ignore, and too skilled to defeat through conventional means. Their very presence changed the political dynamics of any situation they entered. Catherine de Médic's use of her ladies-in-waiting demonstrates how these positions could be transformed into instruments of state policy. She maintained 80 ladies-in-waiting, many of whom were accused of using seduction for political gain. This flying squadron generated enormous scandal, but also gave Catherine unprecedented political influence. The pathway to this ultimate mastery required integrating all the survival techniques into a seamless approach to court life. Masters could shift effortlessly between different survival strategies as situations changed, combining political maneuvering with economic warfare, religious protection with psychological manipulation, and international diplomacy with physical courage. Ladies-in-waiting had direct access to queens, who wielded varying degrees of influence over kings and their courts. This access allowed them to advance the petitions and career interests of their families and others. Many queens required their ladies-in-waiting to pass along intelligence about their families and members of the court, creating networks of information that could influence royal policy. These ultimate survivors became historians and chroniclers of their times, documenting the political developments they had witnessed and influenced. Their writings provided guidance for future generations, while also serving as subtle forms of political influence. Some became so influential that their historical accounts shaped how entire eras were remembered. The most successful masters eventually became the powers behind multiple thrones, influencing political decisions across kingdoms through their networks of former proteges, political allies, and grateful beneficiaries. They operated international networks that could make or break political careers, arrange marriages and alliances, and even influence the outcomes of wars. But perhaps most remarkably, these ultimate masters learned to find genuine satisfaction and meaning in their extraordinary lives. Despite all the dangers, betrayals, and sacrifices required for survival, they discovered ways to maintain their humanity and find purpose in their roles as protectors, advisors, and shapers of history. The medieval princess's lady-in-waiting represents the ultimate example of survival against overwhelming odds. She faced dangers that would terrify modern people, operated in environments of constant betrayal and violence, and yet found ways not just to survive, but to thrive. Her story reminds us that human resourcefulness, when fully applied, can overcome any obstacle and transform even the most dangerous circumstances into opportunities for influence, protection, and lasting historical impact. 27. The historical scandals: lessons from real disasters. The medieval period provides us with numerous documented cases where ladies-in-waiting found themselves at the center of explosive scandals that destroyed careers, ended lives, and toppled governments. These real historical examples offer crucial lessons about the specific dangers that awaited unwary court women. The Tour de Nesle affair of 1314 represents one of the most devastating scandals involving ladies-in-waiting in medieval history. The three daughters-in-law of French King Philip Roman IV became entangled in a web of adultery accusations that would destroy their lives and reshape French politics. Isabella of England, Philip's own daughter, triggered the scandal when she informed her father that the purses she had given to her sisters-in-law as gifts were now mysteriously in the hands of two Norman knights. The investigation that followed was swift and brutal. Philip Roman IV ordered his agents to uncover the truth behind these suspicious circumstances. The knights and princesses were believed to be conducting their illicit affairs inside the Tour de Nesle, a tower in Paris that became synonymous with royal scandal and corruption. When the two Norman knights were seized and tortured, they eventually confessed to the affairs, but their confessions came only after the most extreme forms of medieval interrogation. They were subsequently castrated, drawn and quartered, and hanged. Their deaths served as a warning to anyone who might consider becoming romantically involved with royal women. The three princesses faced different fates based on the evidence against them. Two were found guilty of adultery and sentenced to life imprisonment. Their heads were shaved as a mark of shame, and they were sent to underground dungeons where they would spend the remainder of their lives. One of these women died within a year under circumstances that strongly suggested murder. The other survived 8 years of imprisonment before being released to become a nun, but the damage to her health was permanent, and she died shortly after her release. The third princess was found not guilty, but still faced punishment for her knowledge of the affairs. She too was imprisoned, though for a shorter period. The scandal completely destroyed the reputations of all women involved, and sent a clear message about the consequences of female sexual autonomy in medieval courts. The Bal des Ardents of 1393 provides another example of how quickly court entertainments could turn deadly. and how ladies-in-waiting could find themselves in life-threatening situations through no fault of their own. Queen Isabeau of Bavaria organized this ball to honor the remarriage of one of her ladies-in-waiting. What should have been a celebration became a catastrophe that nearly killed the King of France. Charles VI and 4 noblemen dressed as wild men for a dance performance at the festivities. Their costumes were made of linen soaked in mucinous wax to make them stick to their bodies. This made the costumes incredibly flammable. Despite strict orders to keep all torches away from the dancers during their performance, the king's brother Louis, Duke of Orleans, arrived late and drunk, and carelessly brought a torch into the room. The torch accidentally ignited one of the dancers, and because their costumes were so flammable, the fire spread instantly to the other performers. 4 men were burned alive in full view of the entire court. Contemporary chroniclers described the horrific scene of flaming genitals dropping to the floor, and streams of blood flowing as the nobles burned to death. King Charles VI himself was saved only by the quick thinking of a young lady-in-waiting, who threw her dress over him to smother the flames. Another dancer escaped by jumping into a vat of wine that was nearby, but the psychological trauma of the event affected everyone who witnessed it. The scandal that followed was enormous. The citizens of Paris blamed the decadence of the court for the tragedy. They nearly revolted against the royal family, and had to be appeased through public shows of contrition. The ladies-in-waiting who had organized and attended the event found themselves associated with what was seen as the moral corruption of the French nobility. Eleanor of Aquitaine's ladies-in-waiting during the Second Crusade provide an example of how moral accusations could destroy entire groups of court women simultaneously. Eleanor traveled to the Holy Land in 1147 with a magnificent retinue of ladies-in-waiting. These women represented not just companionship, but a visible display of Eleanor's immense wealth and status. However, the long and difficult journey from Paris to Constantinople and across Anatolia soon began to fray the rigid social expectations that governed their behavior. The harsh conditions of crusading life, combined with the emotional stress of the Holy War, created circumstances where normal court protocols became difficult to maintain. King Louis Roman VII became increasingly concerned about what he perceived as inappropriate conduct among his wife's attendants. The accusations were never specific to individual ladies-in-waiting, but rather encompassed the entire group as a collective moral failure. They were seen as a distraction from the sacred mission, a source of temptation for the crusading knights, and a drain on resources that should have been devoted to fighting the infidels. The scandal reached its peak during the disastrous crossing of Anatolia, where the Crusader army suffered heavy losses. Morale collapsed and scapegoats were sought. Eleanor's luxurious baggage train and her seemingly carefree ladies became convenient targets for criticism. Their very presence was blamed for slowing down the army and encouraging what critics saw as a general loosening of military discipline. The long-term consequences for these ladies-in-waiting were severe and lasting. Many found their reputations permanently damaged, their marriage prospects destroyed, and their families disgraced by association. Some never recovered from the scandal, and spent the remainder of their lives in obscurity or religious seclusion. 28. The gender battlefield. Fighting in a male-dominated system. Medieval courts were fundamentally patriarchal institutions, where women existed at the sufferance of male authority figures. Ladies-in-waiting had to develop sophisticated strategies for surviving and thriving in environments that were designed to limit their power, control their behavior, and eliminate them. When they became inconvenient or threatening, the legal systems of medieval Europe provided minimal protections for women, but some ladies-in-waiting learned to exploit the few legal mechanisms that were available to protect themselves and their interests. They studied property law, inheritance regulations, and marriage contracts, looking for loopholes and advantages that could provide security in an uncertain world. The household remained the fundamental unit of medieval economic and political life. A woman's position within household hierarchies determined her access to resources, information, and protection. Ladies-in-waiting learned to navigate these household dynamics, building relationships with key servants, understanding the informal power structures, and positioning themselves advantageously within the domestic political systems. The challenge for medieval women in legal proceedings was presenting themselves in ways that emphasized their vulnerability without appearing weak, and their competence without seeming threatening. This required extraordinary psychological skill and political awareness. Women who appeared too capable might be seen as dangerous, but those who seemed too helpless might be dismissed as worthless. Medieval trial by combat provides a fascinating example of how the legal system acknowledged its own inadequacy in protecting women, particularly in cases of sexual violence, while judicial duels were theoretically available to resolve legal disputes. The practical reality was that most cases were settled through negotiation, rather than actual combat. The philosophy behind trial by combat for women who had been sexually assaulted seems to have been that if they were willing to risk divine intervention through combat, they could pursue justice through extremely difficult methods. This was a tacit admission that conventional legal systems provided inadequate protection for women who had been victimized. The punishment systems designed specifically for women revealed the deep misogyny that characterized medieval society. The drunkard's cloak was a heavy wooden barrel used to punish women for public drunkenness, but it was also adapted for women accused of promiscuity. The device was designed to be both physically painful and socially humiliating, forcing women to parade through streets while enduring public insults and abuse. Adulterous women were required by law to mark their clothing with letters that identified their supposed crimes. These marking systems turned women's bodies into advertisements of their moral failures, creating permanent social stigma that could never be completely overcome. Even women who were falsely accused found their reputations destroyed by these systems. Ladies-in-waiting learned to use the inherent contradictions in medieval gender systems to their advantage when possible. They understood that men expected them to be both obedient and resourceful, dependent and competent, modest and assertive. Learning to navigate these contradictory expectations required exceptional psychological flexibility. Some ladies-in-waiting became experts at manipulating male authority figures through careful appeals to their vanity, their sense of chivalric duty, or their political interests. They learned to make men believe that protecting or supporting them would enhance the men's own reputations, advance their personal agendas. The most successful court women developed reputations that transcended traditional gender limitations. They became known as individuals who were too valuable to dismiss, too dangerous to ignore, and too skilled to control through conventional methods. But achieving this level of respect and influence required years of careful reputation management and strategic relationship building. 29. The religious battlefield, sacred politics, and spiritual warfare. Religion in medieval courts was never merely a matter of personal faith or spiritual devotion. It was a complex political weapon that could be used to destroy enemies, build alliances, and justify actions that might otherwise be seen as morally questionable. Ladies-in-waiting who understood the political dimensions of medieval Christianity could use religious arguments and observances to advance their survival strategies. Joan of Navarre's experience demonstrates how religious accusations could be deployed to neutralize politically inconvenient women. She was placed under house arrest for several years on charges of witchcraft, but the real motivation was political and financial. Henry V needed the income from her lands to fund his wars with France. The witchcraft accusations provided a convenient legal mechanism for seizing her property while appearing to protect the kingdom from spiritual danger. Foreign queens and their ladies-in-waiting were particularly vulnerable to religious accusation because their loyalty to their adopted kingdoms was always suspect. Joan had chosen to remain in England after her husband Henry Roman IV's death. This decision put her in an impossible position when her stepson Henry V went to war with France. She found herself leading services of thanksgiving for Henry V's military victories, while knowing that her own son-in-law had been killed in the fighting, and one of her sons had been captured by the English forces. The witch hunt phenomenon provided particularly dangerous weapons for eliminating inconvenient women throughout medieval Europe. The techniques used to identify witches were designed to produce guilty verdicts, regardless of actual guilt or innocence. Pricking was a supposedly scientific method for identifying supernatural marks on accused women. Specially designed needles were used to repeatedly pierce the flesh until they found areas that didn't bleed or weren't sensitive to pain. The scratch test provided another method for confirming witchcraft accusations. The accused woman might be scratched by someone claiming to be possessed until the scratching drew blood. If the symptoms of possession appeared to improve after drawing the accused woman's blood, this was taken as confirmation that she was indeed a witch. These tests were designed to be virtually impossible to pass, creating a system where accusations almost inevitably led to convictions. Ladies-in-waiting had to be extraordinarily careful about their religious practices and associations. Any deviation from accepted norms could be used against them by enemies. They needed to demonstrate appropriate piety without appearing fanatical, show sufficient devotion to avoid accusations of heresy, but not so much religious enthusiasm that they seemed to be criticizing the spiritual adequacy of others. The most successful religious strategists learned to use theological arguments as weapons in political warfare. They could frame their loyalty to their mistresses as forms of divine service, present their survival techniques as religiously mandated duties, and use religious language to justify actions that might otherwise appear treasonous or morally questionable. Religious festivals and ceremonies provided both opportunities and dangers for ladies-in-waiting seeking to advance their positions. These occasions required specific behaviors, dress codes, and social interactions that could communicate political messages to those who understood the religious codes. A lady-in-waiting who chose to honor particular saints associated with specific regions could signal her political loyalties without appearing to make political statements. Pilgrimage offered strategic opportunities for ladies-in-waiting in dangerous situations. A well-timed pilgrimage could remove them from immediate political dangers, provide opportunities to build new alliances in different regions or kingdoms, and demonstrate their piety to potential critics. Some ladies-in-waiting used extended pilgrimages as covers for intelligence gathering, diplomatic negotiations, or simply as methods for disappearing when their court positions became untenable. The economics of religious patronage created additional opportunities for strategic ladies-in-waiting. Making donations to the right religious institutions could buy protection, political influence, and social standing, but the timing and targeting of these donations had to be calculated carefully to maximize political benefit while avoiding accusations of attempting to buy spiritual favors or divine intervention. 30. The international chess game diplomacy is survival strategy. Medieval Europe functioned as an interconnected web of competing kingdoms, duchies, and city-states, where political alliances shifted constantly based on marriages, military conflicts, and economic considerations. The most successful ladies-in-waiting built international networks that provided protection and opportunities that extended far beyond their immediate courts. The basic foundation of international survival was maintaining correspondence with ladies-in-waiting in other kingdoms and courts. These women faced similar challenges and could provide advance warnings about political developments, information about potential escape routes, and emotional support during the most difficult periods. Some of these networks became so extensive and sophisticated that they functioned as informal intelligence services, rivaling the official diplomatic channels. Language skills were absolutely essential for building effective international networks. Ladies-in-waiting who spoke multiple languages fluently could communicate with a much wider range of contacts, understand the nuances of foreign political developments, and position themselves as valuable translators and cultural interpreters. The most linguistically gifted could detect subtle political meanings in foreign correspondences that monolingual speakers would completely miss. Cultural knowledge provided another crucial layer of international networking capability. Understanding foreign customs, religious practices, social protocols, and political traditions allowed ladies-in-waiting to build meaningful relationships with visitors from other kingdoms. These relationships could provide future opportunities if domestic political circumstances made international escape or relocation necessary. Some ladies-in-waiting became informal ambassadors, carrying sensitive messages between courts and facilitating diplomatic relationships that couldn't be conducted through official channels. This was extremely dangerous work that required exceptional discretion, political skill, and personal courage, but it could provide enormous influence and protection. Ladies-in-waiting who proved reliable in diplomatic roles might find themselves protected by multiple kingdoms, who valued their services too highly to allow them to be eliminated. Trade relationships provided practical foundations for international networks that could transcend political boundaries and survive changes in official diplomatic relationships. Ladies-in-waiting who understood international commerce could build business relationships that provided both financial opportunities and political connections. Merchant networks often operated across kingdoms and could provide communication channels and escape routes when official diplomatic relationships failed. Marriage alliances created the most permanent forms of international connection, but they also created the most complex and potentially dangerous obligations. A lady-in-waiting who married into a foreign noble family gained new protections and opportunities, but she also acquired new enemies and new responsibilities that could conflict with her previous loyalties. These international marriages had to be calculated extremely carefully to provide maximum long-term benefit while minimizing the risk of creating conflicting obligations that could prove impossible to fulfill. The most sophisticated international operators learned to play different kingdoms against each other for their own advantage. They might provide valuable information to one kingdom about another's military preparations, broker secret negotiations between enemies who couldn't communicate directly, or arrange for political refugees to find sanctuary in exchange for valuable intelligence or services. This type of multi-sided diplomacy required exceptional political skill and enormous personal courage, but it could provide protection that transcended individual political changes. 31. The violence matrix: physical survival in brutal times. Medieval courts were environments where violence was always a possibility, and ladies-in-waiting had to develop comprehensive strategies for physical survival that went far beyond simply avoiding dangerous situations. The threat of violence permeated every aspect of court life, and preparation for physical confrontation was as important as political maneuvering or economic planning. The execution of Anne Boleyn and the imprisonment of her ladies-in-waiting provides one of the most stark reminders of how quickly court violence could escalate, and how proximity to power could become proximity to deadly danger. Anne's ladies were not merely witnesses to her alleged crimes. They were active participants in the accusations against her. Some were imprisoned in the Tower of London, and their testimonies were used to condemn their mistress to death. The most fundamental physical survival skill was developing extraordinary situational awareness. Ladies-in-waiting had to constantly assess their surroundings for potential threats, identify multiple escape routes from any location, and recognize the subtle warning signs that violence was about to erupt. This required developing almost supernatural sensitivity to changes in mood, body language, and environmental factors that might indicate impending danger. Some ladies-in-waiting secretly learned basic fighting skills. Though martial training was generally forbidden to women, they might study knife fighting techniques, learn how to use household items as weapons, or develop skills for escaping from physical restraints. The most skilled practitioners develop reputations as dangerous opponents, which could deter some potential attackers, but this reputation had to be carefully managed, because appearing too martial could create new enemies who saw them as threats. Poison represented one of the most constant and insidious threats in medieval courts. Ladies-in-waiting had to develop sophisticated strategies for avoiding contaminated food and drink. This included learning to recognize the symptoms of various poisons, understanding which foods and beverages were most likely to be tampered with, and developing networks of trusted food tasters who could test suspicious items. Some became experts at poison detection themselves, using techniques passed down through generations of court survivors. Bodyguard networks provided another essential layer of physical protection for ladies-in-waiting. Those who could afford it might hire personal guards, but more commonly they developed informal protection arrangements with servants, guards, and other courtiers, who had their own reasons for keeping specific ladies-in-waiting safe. These protection networks required careful cultivation and maintenance, and could become dangerous liabilities if they included unreliable people or individuals with conflicting loyalties. The most sophisticated physical survivors learned to use palace architecture for maximum protection. They studied which rooms were safest during different types of emergencies, which corridors provided the best escape routes under various circumstances, and how to position themselves strategically during potentially dangerous gatherings. Some even arranged for secret passages or hidden chambers that could provide emergency shelter if immediate escape became impossible. Medical knowledge became a crucial survival skill for ladies-in-waiting who might be injured in violent encounters. Learning basic wound care, understanding which herbs could treat injuries, and knowing how to set broken bones could literally mean the difference between life and death. Some ladies-in-waiting became skilled enough to serve as battlefield medics during conflicts, or to treat injuries sustained in court violence. 32. The psychological fortress mental survival under extreme pressure. The psychological pressures of medieval court life could destroy even the most intelligent and well-prepared individuals. Ladies-in-waiting who survived long careers had to develop extraordinary mental resilience and sophisticated techniques for maintaining their psychological health despite constant danger, uncertainty, and betrayal. The case of ladies-in-waiting who served Henry Roman VIII's 6 wives illustrates the enormous psychological toll of court service during politically volatile periods. These women had to watch their mistresses rise to the heights of power, only to fall into disgrace, divorce, or execution. They had to adapt constantly to rapid changes in royal favor, religious policies that shifted overnight, and political alliances that could become deadly enmities without warning. The most basic psychological survival skill was learning to compartmentalize different aspects of their lives and experiences. Ladies-in-waiting had to separate their public personas from their private selves, their professional duties from their personal feelings, and their immediate survival concerns from their long-term goals and aspirations. This mental compartmentalization protected them from the emotional damage that could result from constant betrayal, violence, and uncertainty. Emotional regulation became a daily practice that required constant attention and refinement. They had to learn to control their facial expressions, voice tone, and body language, regardless of their internal emotional state. This required developing sophisticated techniques for managing fear, anger, sadness, and even joy, because any uncontrolled emotional display could be interpreted as weakness, or used against them by enemies who were constantly watching for vulnerabilities. Memory techniques were absolutely crucial for ladies-in-waiting who had to remember vast amounts of sensitive information without ever writing anything down that could be discovered and used against them. They developed complex systems for organizing and recalling information, using methods borrowed from scholars, merchants, and other professionals whose livelihoods depended on accurate memory. Some became so skilled that they could recall entire conversations, word for word, months or years after they had taken place. Stress management became essential for surviving the chronic pressure of court life without suffering complete mental breakdown. Ladies-in-waiting developed various techniques for maintaining their psychological equilibrium, despite constant dangers and uncertainties. This might include meditation practices, physical exercise routines, creative activities that provided emotional release, or spiritual practices that offered comfort and meaning. The most psychologically sophisticated survivors learned to use apparent mental instability as both a shield and a weapon. Appearing to be mentally unbalanced could protect them from some threats, because enemies might dismiss them as harmless or unpredictable. But controlling this appearance of instability while maintaining actual mental clarity and strategic thinking capability require exceptional psychological skill and self-discipline. Sleep management became a survival skill for ladies-in-waiting who were expected to be available at all hours, to respond to their mistress's needs at any moment of the day or night. They developed techniques for functioning effectively on minimal and interrupted sleep, including power napping strategies, methods for appearing alert when exhausted, and ways to maintain mental acuity despite chronic sleep deprivation. 33. The legacy architecture building beyond death. The most sophisticated ladies-in-waiting understood that their survival strategies had to extend beyond their own lifetimes. They developed complex legacy planning systems designed to protect their families, preserve their influence, and continue their work even after their deaths. The story of Francisca de Silva and her son Diego Hurtado de Mendoza provides a perfect example of how a lady-in-waiting's experiences and relationships could influence international politics for generations after her death. Francisca served Catherine of Aragon during the Spanish princess's early years in England. The treatment that Catherine received at the hands of Henry Romane created a lasting family hatred that affected Spanish royal policy for decades. Diego became a Spanish royal advisor and carried his mother's indignation into the highest levels of Spanish government. When he heard news of Anne Boleyn's execution in 1536, he wrote that no punishment could descend upon Henry Romane that wouldn't make him personally happy. This demonstrates how the emotional experiences of a single lady-in-waiting could create international political consequences that lasted for generations. Documentation became a crucial element of legacy planning despite the enormous risks involved in keeping written records. Some ladies-in-waiting maintained carefully hidden accounts of their activities, relationships, and acquired knowledge. These records were designed to be discovered only by trusted allies or family members after their deaths. Such documentation could provide evidence of loyalty, reveal enemy conspiracies, or offer detailed guidance to successors. Protestant writer John Foxe actively sought out former ladies-in-waiting as sources for his famous Book of Martyrs during Elizabeth's reign. This demonstrates how the testimonies and memories of these women became valuable historical sources that could shape how entire eras were remembered and interpreted. Ladies-in-waiting who had witnessed important historical events could influence the official historical record long after their deaths. Mentoring relationships became another crucial element of effective legacy planning. Some ladies-in-waiting became teachers and guides for younger women entering court service. These relationships were structured to provide immediate mutual benefit, while also creating lasting networks of loyalty that could endure across decades. The most successful mentors built extensive systems of former proteges, who could provide ongoing support and protection for the mentor's family and interests. Financial legacy planning became increasingly sophisticated among the most successful court women. They arranged for complex trust systems, established business relationships that would benefit their children, and created financial networks that could provide long-term security for multiple generations of their families. Some even arranged for posthumous payments to political allies who would continue to protect their interests and reputations after their deaths. Information management represented perhaps the most delicate aspect of legacy planning. Ladies-in-waiting had to decide carefully which secrets would die with them, which should be revealed posthumously for maximum political impact, and which should be passed on to successors who could use them for continued influence. Some arranged for delayed revelation of particularly sensitive information, using their deaths as timing mechanisms for political revelations that could reshape entire kingdoms. 34. The technology of evolution adapting to changing courts. Medieval court culture evolved constantly throughout the period, and the most successful ladies-in-waiting learned to adapt their survival strategies, to take advantage of new opportunities and defend against new types of threats that emerged as court systems became more complex and sophisticated. The growth in the size and complexity of royal households throughout the medieval period created new opportunities for advancement and influence. As courts became larger and more elaborate, there were more specialized positions available, more opportunities for building diverse alliances, and more ways to develop expertise that could provide security and advancement. Communication technologies evolved significantly during the medieval centuries, and ladies-in-waiting learned to exploit new methods for gathering and transmitting information. They adapted their intelligence networks to take advantage of improved roads, more reliable postal systems, and expanding merchant networks that could carry information across greater distances more reliably. The increasing complexity of court ceremonies created new opportunities for strategic positioning and political communication. As courts became more elaborate, there were more nuanced methods available for communicating status, loyalty, and political messages. Through participation in ceremonial events, ladies-in-waiting who mastered these evolving ceremonial languages could influence political perceptions without appearing to engage in overt political activities. Financial technologies also evolved throughout the medieval period. The development of more sophisticated banking systems, credit instruments, and international trade networks provided new opportunities for ladies-in-waiting to build wealth and financial security. Those who understood these innovations could protect themselves more effectively against economic warfare and build financial resources that could support their political activities. Legal systems became more complex as medieval society developed, and ladies-in-waiting who understood these legal changes and innovations could better protect themselves and their families from legal attacks. They learned to use new legal procedures, appeal to different types of courts, and structure their affairs to take maximum advantage of available legal protections. The most adaptable ladies-in-waiting learned to anticipate future changes in court systems and political structures, and position themselves strategically to benefit from developing trends. They studied the evolution of court organization, changes in political structures, and developments in social relationships, making strategic decisions based on where they anticipated the medieval world was heading, rather than simply reacting to current conditions and immediate threats. 35. The eternal victory transcending historical limitations. The most extraordinary ladies-in-waiting eventually transcended the immediate survival game entirely. They moved beyond simply trying to survive in a dangerous and hostile world, to actively reshaping that world according to their own vision of what was possible for women to achieve and accomplish. 4 ladies-in-waiting actually became queens of England, demonstrating the ultimate level of success that was theoretically possible in this dangerous but potentially rewarding career. But this extraordinary advancement came at enormous personal risk. 2 of those queens ended up being executed, demonstrating that even the highest possible success could lead to the ultimate failure and the most complete destruction. These masters of court survival developed reputations and influence networks that transcended individual relationships or specific political circumstances. They became known throughout Europe as women who could not be ignored, dismissed, or destroyed through conventional methods. Their very presence in any political situation changed the dynamics of power relationships and forced other players to recalculate their strategies. Calvin de Médicier's transformation of her ladies-in-waiting into instruments of state policy represents the ultimate evolution of court survival techniques. She maintained 80 ladies-in-waiting, many of whom were allegedly used for political seduction and intelligence gathering. This flying squadron generated enormous scandal throughout European courts, but it also gave Catherine unprecedented political influence and control. The pathway to this ultimate level of mastery required integrating all survival techniques into a seamless and flexible approach to life and politics. These masters could shift effortlessly between different strategies as situations changed, combining economic warfare with religious protection, international diplomacy with psychological manipulation, and family networking with intelligence operations, creating comprehensive systems of power that could survive any individual crisis. But perhaps most remarkably, these ultimate masters learned to find genuine meaning and satisfaction in their extraordinary and dangerous lives. Despite all the betrayals, sacrifices, and constant threats, they discovered ways to maintain their humanity and find deep purpose in their roles as protectors, advisors, and shapers of historical events. Their legacy continues to inspire anyone who faces hostile environments, where they must create power from powerlessness and refuse to be defined by the limitations that others attempt to impose upon them. They proved that human intelligence, determination, and strategic thinking could overcome even the most seemingly impossible circumstances. The medieval princess's lady-in-waiting represents the ultimate example of human adaptability and resilience in the face of overwhelming adversity. These remarkable women transformed medieval courts from places designed for destruction into laboratories for developing extraordinary human capabilities. They showed that true power often lies not in official authority, but in the ability to understand, adapt to, and ultimately transform the systems that attempt to control our lives. Their techniques for gathering and using information strategically, building diverse and resilient alliance networks, managing economic resources for maximum advantage, and adapting successfully to rapidly changing circumstances. All remain as relevant today as they were centuries ago, for anyone facing challenging situations that require exceptional resourcefulness and strategic thinking. The story of the medieval lady-in-waiting is ultimately a story of triumph over impossible odds. It demonstrates the victory of intelligence over brute force, of careful strategy over raw circumstance, and of human determination over systems designed to crush the human spirit entirely. In a world that offered them no official recognition or power, they created their own sources of influence, and in doing so, they changed that world forever, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire and instruct us today. 36. The underground network serving codes and secret systems. The most sophisticated ladies-in-waiting understood that their survival depended not just on managing relationships with other nobles, but on building comprehensive networks that included servants throughout the medieval court system. These servant networks developed elaborate coding systems and communication methods that could outsmart even the most dangerous political situations. Medieval servants created layers of deniability in their information gathering and transmission systems. A secret might pass through 5 different people before reaching its intended target, starting with a kitchen maid who overheard a conversation between nobles, moving to a stable boy who carried the information to a visiting merchant who would spread the story in the next town, then reaching a rival noble's servant who would finally carry the intelligence to their master's attention. By the time a piece of scandalous information reached a lord or lady's ears, its original source had become completely untraceable. This system protected everyone involved in the intelligence network, while ensuring that dangerous information could still flow where it needed to go. The complexity of these chains meant that even under torture, most participants could only reveal 1 or 2 links in a communication network. Some servants took these protective systems even further, using overheard threats to anonymously protect potential victims from danger. They might leave unsigned warning notes in prayer books or religious texts, where only the intended recipient would be likely to find them. These notes were written in simple language that could be interpreted as religious meditation if discovered by the wrong person. Other protective techniques involved altering the castle's normal operational schedules to keep targeted individuals away from dangerous areas at specific times. A servant might arrange for a lady-in-waiting's chambers to need urgent cleaning, just when enemies were planning to search her belongings for evidence. Or they might create believable reasons for someone to be summoned away from a potentially deadly gathering. Some servants became masters of creating artificial emergencies that could disrupt dangerous situations. They learned to time kitchen fires, livestock escapes, or minor accidents to coincide perfectly with moments when their protected individuals needed distractions or escape opportunities. These manufactured crises required careful planning and precise timing to appear completely natural. The true masters of this servant intelligence craft didn't just collect secrets randomly. They learned to weaponize timing with extraordinary precision. A servant might hold onto a particularly damaging piece of gossip for months or even years, waiting for the perfect moment to allow it to surface naturally. Perhaps they would release the information when their target was already in political disgrace and vulnerable, making the revelation more devastating and harder to defend against. Or they might time revelations to coincide with periods of political instability, when lords were more likely to believe negative information about rivals, and less likely to investigate the sources of damaging intelligence. These weren't reckless informants acting on impulse. They were sophisticated strategists playing extremely long games, understanding that information had expiration dates like fresh milk in summer, becoming worthless unless deployed at exactly the right moment for maximum impact. Ladies-in-waiting who understood these servant networks could tap into intelligence systems that rivaled anything available to official court diplomats. They learned the specific signals and communication methods that servants used to warn each other of approaching dangers. A particular way of arranging cleaning supplies in a corridor could indicate that certain areas were under surveillance. The timing of bell ringing for religious services might carry coded warnings about which nobles were in dangerous moods. Some servant networks developed elaborate musical communication systems. Kitchen staff might sing specific hymns while preparing meals to warn about poisoning attempts or contaminated food. Stable workers could whistle particular tunes while grooming horses to indicate which visitors were actually enemy spies. These musical codes were nearly impossible for outsiders to detect or decode because they blended seamlessly into the normal sounds of castle life. Punishment for getting caught in these intelligence activities could be brutal and permanent, so servants developed sophisticated countermeasures to protect their operations. Many worked in coordinated pairs. One person would listen carefully to important conversations, while another would keep watch for approaching footsteps or unexpected visitors. They established elaborate emergency signal systems for warning each other about immediate dangers. Some servant networks devised backup communication methods for use when their primary systems were discovered or compromised. They might switch from musical signals to visual codes based on clothing arrangement, or from written messages hidden in religious books to verbal codes disguised as prayers or casual conversations about weather and farming. The most sophisticated servant intelligence operators mastered the art of moving through castle spaces without leaving any trace of their presence or activities. They learned to walk with specific gaits that minimized footstep sounds on different types of flooring materials. Stone corridors required different techniques than wooden floors or packed earth surfaces. They kept their gazes lowered just enough to avoid direct eye contact with nobles who might remember them later, but not so low that they couldn't observe important details about conversations and activities happening around them. Their footsteps remained light enough to blend into the background noise of normal castle operations. The clatter of dishes, the rustling of rushes, the creaking of wooden beams. They learned precisely how to make their presence completely forgettable, understanding the exact level of deference required in their posture and movements to signal appropriate subservience without drawing attention. The perfect tone of voice that neither challenged authority nor lingered in anyone's memory after they had passed by and disappeared. Some even practiced specialized breathing techniques to minimize any sound they might make while eavesdropping on sensitive conversations. They learned to control their heartbeat and suppress coughing or other involuntary sounds that might reveal their presence to the people they were spying upon. Others developed extraordinary patience, allowing them to remain motionless for hours if necessary, while waiting for opportunities to overhear crucial information. 37. The invisible shield becoming forgettable while staying essential. One of the most sophisticated survival techniques developed by medieval ladies-in-waiting was learning how to become functionally invisible when necessary, while maintaining enough presence and competence to remain essential to their mistresses. This paradoxical skill required extraordinary psychological sophistication and constant awareness. The ability to control your own visibility represented one of the highest forms of political intelligence. Ladies-in-waiting who mastered this technique could move seamlessly between states of complete anonymity and commanding presence, depending on what each specific situation required for maximum advantage and safety. When they needed to gather intelligence or avoid dangerous attention, they could become virtually invisible to everyone around them. Their movements became silent and unobtrusive. Their clothing blended perfectly with their surroundings. Their facial expressions remained neutral and unmemorable. Even their breathing patterns adjusted to minimize their presence. But when circumstances required them to step forward with authority and confidence, they could instantly transform themselves into commanding figures who demanded attention and respect. Their posture would change dramatically from deferential to authoritative. Their voices would shift from whispered subservience to clear, confident communication. This transformation required not just physical adjustments, but complete psychological shifts that could happen in seconds. Ladies-in-waiting practiced these transitions until they became automatic responses that required no conscious thought or preparation time. They could shift between visibility states as naturally as changing the direction of their walking. The shield of anonymity had dangerous cracks that could expose ladies-in-waiting if they pushed their invisible status too far, alter one too many documents, lose one too many important letters, or manipulate one too many situations, and suspicion would inevitably ignite like dry straw touched by flame. A noble might not notice a single missing piece of jewelry, or one mysteriously altered document, but a clear pattern of vanished valuables and modified records would eventually attract unwanted attention from people with power to investigate. Ladies-in-waiting had to walk a razor's edge constantly, gauging exactly how much they could influence events and situations. Before their carefully maintained invisibility wore dangerously thin, the wisest practitioners of this technique acted like skilled gardeners pruning a valuable vine. They would make a subtle correction here, provide a gentle redirect there, never drawing any attention to the hand that was actually guiding the growth and direction of important political developments. Their interventions appeared accidental or naturally occurring, rather than deliberate manipulations of people and circumstances. They understood that the most effective influence was often the kind that remained completely invisible to its targets. People who didn't realize they were being guided or manipulated were less likely to resist the desired changes in their behavior, and less likely to investigate the sources of their new ideas or altered perspectives. The constant tension between loyalty and self-preservation played out in countless small daily choices. A lady-in-waiting might genuinely care for her mistress's well-being and future, yet still need to protect herself from the consequences of her mistress's poor decisions or dangerous impulses. This required developing extraordinary emotional compartmentalization skills that allowed them to maintain genuine affection and loyalty, while still taking necessary protective actions. Some ladies-in-waiting became so skilled at managing their visibility and impact that they could shift seamlessly between complete invisibility and command presence, depending on what each specific situation required. They might spend hours moving unnoticed through court gatherings, gathering sensitive intelligence about developing situations, then suddenly step forward with perfect timing and confidence to provide crucial advice or support to their mistress. This ability to control their own presence and political impact requires years of careful practice and psychological training. They had to understand not just how to appear invisible when necessary, but how to make their periods of visibility maximally effective and memorable. When they chose to be seen and heard, every word and gesture had to carry maximum weight and create lasting impressions that would benefit them later. The most successful invisible practitioners learned to use other people's expectations and psychological prejudices against them. If nobles expected ladies-in-waiting to be decorative but politically unimportant, they would carefully cultivate that impression in public settings, while secretly wielding enormous influence behind the scenes. Their apparent powerlessness became their most effective camouflage. If court observers assumed that women were naturally gossipy, emotional, and untrustworthy, they would allow that assumption to provide cover for their intelligence-gathering activities, making their information collection appear accidental rather than systematic. Their questions seemed motivated by feminine curiosity, rather than strategic intelligence requirements. This type of strategic invisibility required understanding not just your own psychology, but the psychological blind spots and unconscious assumptions of everyone around you. The most skilled practitioners could predict exactly what other people would notice and what they would ignore, using these predictions to control how they were perceived and remembered. They understood that different people had different patterns of attention and different types of memory. Some nobles noticed clothing and jewelry but ignored conversations. Others remembered faces clearly but forgot names immediately. By understanding these individual patterns, ladies-in-waiting could adjust their visibility to match each person's specific perceptual limitations. 38. The reputation reconstruction rebuilding after scandal. Even the most careful ladies-in-waiting sometimes found themselves caught in scandals that threatened to destroy their reputations and survival prospects. The ability to rebuild and reconstruct a damaged reputation was crucial. For long-term survival in medieval courts, where reputation often mattered more than actual guilt or innocence. When a lady-in-waiting faced accusations of moral or political impropriety, her survival often depended on the speed and sophistication of her reputation reconstruction campaign. These efforts required coordinated action from multiple supporters and allies, each playing specific roles in the rehabilitation process. The campaign had to begin immediately before negative impressions became permanently fixed in people's minds. Supporters would begin by implementing subtle character witnessing strategies. They might casually mention to other court members that they had personally observed the accused woman's pious behavior during religious services throughout recent months, or that they had seen her leaving midnight masses regularly, creating an impression of genuine devotion that contradicted accusations of moral failing. These casual observations had to appear completely spontaneous, rather than coordinated character references. Supporters learned to work these testimonials into normal conversations about other topics entirely, making their defense of the accused woman seem like natural responses to unfair attacks on someone they had personally observed living virtuously. Other allies would provide more concrete character evidence. They might suddenly recall specific instances of the woman's virtuous behavior that had previously gone unmentioned. Stories about her charity toward the poor, her careful attention to her religious duties, or her modest behavior in private situations. These supporting stories had to be believable and specific enough to counter accusations with concrete evidence. Some supporters would even emphasize the purity and modesty of her dress and personal habits as evidence of her moral character. They would point out that her clothing was always appropriately modest, that her behavior in mixed company was consistently proper, and that her private conduct had always been above reproach, based on their personal observations. In extreme cases, supporters would stage elaborate public demonstrations of the accused woman's virtue and worth. These demonstrations required careful planning and coordination to appear spontaneous and natural rather than obviously orchestrated. The goal was to create public displays of support that would influence general opinion in a woman's favor. The Canterbury case provides a perfect example of this technique. When a young lady in waiting faced serious moral accusations that threatened to destroy her career and reputation permanently, her supporters implemented a comprehensive reconstruction campaign that transformed her public image completely. Servants and allies secretly arranged to smuggle the accused woman into a nearby nunnery where she could demonstrate her religious devotion publicly and dramatically. This required coordinating with sympathetic religious authorities who were willing to participate in the rehabilitation effort, despite the political risks of supporting someone under serious accusations. Then they arranged for her to perform what appeared to be a miraculous healing of a noble sick child. This carefully orchestrated event required finding a child with a condition that could be improved through natural means, but would appear miraculous to casual observers. The timing and staging had to be perfect to create maximum impact on public opinion. The miraculous healing completely rewrote her public reputation overnight, transforming her from a suspected immoral woman into what appeared to be a blessed instrument of divine intervention and favor. The demonstration was so effective that her former accusers found themselves unable to continue their attacks without appearing to oppose divine will itself. These weren't simple rescue operations conducted by loyal friends. They were elaborate theatrical performances where survival depended entirely on convincing storytelling and careful audience management. Every detail had to be perfectly coordinated and executed. Any inconsistency or obvious staging could destroy the entire effort and make the women's situation even worse than before. The timing of reputation reconstruction efforts was absolutely crucial for their success. Launching the campaign too early before public opinion had fully formed against the accused woman could draw unwanted attention to the accusations themselves, making more people aware of the scandal than would otherwise have heard about it. This could backfire spectacularly, but waiting too long allowed negative impressions to become so deeply entrenched in people's minds that they became impossible to overcome. Once people had formed firm opinions about someone's guilt, they became resistant to evidence that contradicted their initial judgments. The reconstruction campaign had to hit the perfect timing, when people were aware of the accusations but hadn't yet decided what they believed about them. The most successful Reconstruction campaigns used multiple complementary strategies simultaneously. They would combine character witnessing with concrete evidence of virtue, public demonstrations of religious devotion with private lobbying efforts among influential court members, and religious arguments about redemption with political considerations about justice. Some campaigns even involved creating alternative explanations for the suspicious behavior that had triggered the original accusations. They might suggest that the woman had been the innocent victim of other people's machinations and schemes, or that her apparently questionable actions had actually been motivated by secret charitable or religious purposes that couldn't be revealed publicly without compromising other people. The psychological impact of successful reputation reconstruction could be more powerful than the original scandal itself. A woman who survived serious accusations and emerged with her reputation intact or even enhanced often found herself more influential than before, because people viewed her as someone who had been tested under extreme pressure and proven her worth and character through adversity. 39. The gender trap navigation, avoiding male-specific dangers. Male members of medieval courts faced different but equally dangerous traps that ladies-in-waiting had to understand and help navigate for their own protection. Understanding these male-specific dangers was crucial for ladies-in-waiting, who might need to protect male allies or family members from the unique vulnerabilities that men faced in court environments. Medieval court culture created specific pressure points for men that could be exploited by enemies seeking to destroy their careers or eliminate them as threats. Ladies-in-waiting who understood these masculine vulnerabilities could help protect male allies while also avoiding situations where they might accidentally trigger dangerous responses from insecure or threatened men. A young squire pressured into delivering a challenge for his lord's duel faced an impossible choice between competing loyalties. Refusal meant disgrace and potential banishment from court, loss of his position and future prospects, but accepting the mission might result in his own death as a proxy fighter in the subsequent combat, or in deadly retaliation from the challenged party. Many young men developed elaborate avoidance tactics for these dangerous assignments that required their participation in potentially lethal conflicts. They might conveniently forget important messages about challenges, or accidentally delay their delivery until circumstances changed, making the challenges inappropriate or impossible to pursue. Some would feign sudden illness before scheduled tournaments, or combat events where they might be required to fight as representatives of their lords. They learned to time these illnesses perfectly to avoid dangerous situations, without appearing to be deliberately avoiding their duties. The illnesses had to be believable, but not so serious as to suggest permanent weakness or disability. Others cultivated deliberate reputations as terrible fighters, so that nobles wouldn't risk using them in important contests where victory was crucial for political reasons. They would deliberately lose practice fights and training sessions, making themselves appear incompetent with weapons and combat techniques. This protected them from being chosen for dangerous assignments, but required careful management to avoid seeming completely worthless. Drinking clubs among male courtiers became covert warning systems that allowed men to protect each other from various dangers and threats. What appeared to outside observers as rowdy tavern gatherings and meaningless social activities were actually sophisticated information exchanges with specific signal patterns and communication methods that could warn members about developing dangers. These drinking gatherings provided perfect cover for sensitive communications because they appeared to be simple social entertainment rather than organized intelligence operations. The alcohol provided plausible explanations for any unusual behavior or suspicious conversations that might be overheard. While hostile observers were spies, a mug slammed down twice on the tavern table in quick succession meant to avoid the stables tonight, because enemies were planning to ambush someone there. Wine spill in a clockwise direction warned of incoming tax collectors or unexpected visits from royal auditors. who might be looking for evidence of financial irregularities or corruption. Different types of drinks carried different types of warnings. Ale spilled on the floor indicated physical danger. Wine poured on the table suggested financial threats. Mixed drinks knocked over warned of political investigations. These coded warning systems allowed men to protect each other, without appearing to challenge their lord's authority directly, or interfere with official business. Ladies-in-waiting who understood these male warning systems could sometimes help protect their own male allies and family members by ensuring they received crucial warnings about developing dangers through alternative communication channels. When the normal male networks became compromised or dangerous to use, they could also provide alternative communication methods for men who needed to share sensitive information, but couldn't do so safely through normal male channels. Women's conversations and activities were often dismissed as trivial by male observers, making them perfect covers for transmitting important intelligence between men who couldn't communicate directly. The herbal knowledge that passed between court women was particularly sophisticated and potentially dangerous in the wrong hands, but it could also be used to protect male allies from various types of threats and dangerous situations. A carefully prepared tincture of henbane could make hands tremble, just enough to accidentally spill wine on an aggressive nobleman, creating a distraction that might prevent a dangerous confrontation from escalating into violence. Ladies-in-waiting learned to prepare various herbal remedies and substances that could be used defensively to protect themselves or their male allies from dangerous situations and threats. Some herbs could induce temporary illness symptoms, allowing someone to avoid a dangerous assignment or confrontation without appearing to refuse deliberately or challenge authority directly. Other herbal preparations could affect mood or behavior, making an aggressive person more calm and manageable, or causing someone to become temporarily confused or distracted during crucial moments when clear thinking might lead them into dangerous situations. These herbal techniques required extensive knowledge and careful preparation, because the wrong dosage could cause serious harm or even death to the intended target. The most sophisticated herbal practitioners understood not just the effects of individual herbs and substances, but how different substances interacted with each other, and how to adjust dosages based on the recipient's size, health, and current circumstances. They could create combinations that produce specific effects for particular situations and needs. They also understood the crucial importance of plausible deniability in all their herbal interventions. Any herbal manipulation or influence had to appear accidental or naturally occurring rather than deliberately administered. If someone suspected deliberate poisoning or manipulation, the consequences could be imprisonment or execution for everyone involved in the deception. 40. The International Intelligence Web Cross-Border Survival Networks. The most sophisticated ladies-in-waiting developed intelligence networks that extended across multiple kingdoms and political boundaries. These international connections provided crucial warnings about developing political situations that could affect their safety and long-term survival prospects, while also creating opportunities for building influence that transcended individual royal courts. International intelligence work required extraordinary courage and skill, because discovery would have meant accusations of treason and espionage, which carried the penalty of death for both the women involved and potentially their families and close associates. Yet the benefits of international networking were so valuable for survival that many ladies-in-waiting accepted these enormous risks. Catherine of Aragon's ladies-in-waiting during the divorce crisis provide a perfect example of international intelligence networking. Under the most dangerous and politically sensitive circumstances, these women risked disgrace, imprisonment, and even death by spying for their mistress and maintaining secret communications with Spanish court officials who were monitoring the situation from across national borders. The ladies-in-waiting understood instinctively that Henry Roman VIII's efforts to annul his marriage to Catherine had international implications that could affect Spanish-English relations for decades to come. They positioned themselves strategically as crucial intelligence assets for both their immediate mistress and her Spanish royal supporters, who needed accurate information about English court politics. These brave women maintained secret correspondence networks that allowed sensitive information to flow between the English and Spanish courts. Despite the official diplomatic tensions and Henry's deliberate attempts to isolate Catherine from her foreign supporters and political allies, the correspondence networks required elaborate codes and multiple layers of security to avoid detection. Messages were often hidden in seemingly innocent communications about religious matters, family news, or commercial transactions. The real intelligence was embedded in coded language that appeared to be discussing personal concerns rather than sensitive political developments. This camouflage was essential for protecting the communication networks from discovery and destruction. The international intelligence work required extraordinary personal courage, because discovery would have meant accusations of treason against England, which carried the penalty of death for everyone involved in the network. The ladies-in-waiting knew that they were risking their lives every time they gathered intelligence or transmitted information to foreign powers and governments. But they also understood that Catherine's treatment had implications for all women in similar political positions. If Henry could dispose of a Spanish princess without serious consequences, it would set precedents that could affect other royal marriages throughout Europe. Their intelligence work was about more than protecting one woman from an abusive husband. It was about defending the political rights and protections of royal women everywhere. Protestant writer John Foxe actively sought out former ladies-in-waiting as sources for his famous Book of Martyrs during Elizabeth I's reign. This demonstrates how these women became valuable historical witnesses, whose testimonies could influence international political relationships and religious conflicts for generations after their deaths. Foxe understood that ladies-in-waiting had witnessed crucial historical events from unique perspectives that weren't available to male observers or official chroniclers. Their testimonies could provide alternative versions of important events that challenged official narratives and revealed hidden truths about how political decisions were actually made. The international intelligence networks developed by ladies-in-waiting often outlasted the specific political situations that had originally created them. Women who had served together in dangerous circumstances maintained lifelong relationships that provided ongoing intelligence and mutual support across political boundaries. These relationships became permanent assets for survival. These networks became particularly valuable during periods of international conflict, when official diplomatic channels were disrupted or compromised entirely. Ladies-in-waiting who had maintained personal relationships across borders could provide alternative communication methods for crucial political intelligence that governments desperately needed. Some ladies-in-waiting became informal ambassadors and negotiators, carrying sensitive messages between courts that couldn't communicate through official diplomatic channels. This work was extremely dangerous because it required traveling across potentially hostile territories and borders, while carrying information that could be considered treasonous by multiple governments simultaneously. The most successful international intelligence operators learned to use religious networks and commercial relationships as cover for their political activities. They might arrange to make pilgrimages that coincidentally took them through regions where they needed to deliver sensitive messages, or gather important information about military preparations, or they might develop business relationships with merchants who traveled regularly between kingdoms and regions. These merchants could carry coded messages and small valuables that maintained international intelligence communications without appearing to engage in political activities. The commercial relationships provided perfect camouflage. For sensitive political work, religious pilgrimages offered particularly effective cover for international intelligence operations because they provided legitimate reasons for traveling across borders and visiting multiple kingdoms during single journeys. The religious motivation made the travel seem innocent, rather than politically motivated or strategically planned. Religious institutions also provided neutral meeting grounds, where representatives from different kingdoms could communicate safely, without appearing to engage in official diplomatic negotiations. Ladies-in-waiting could meet with their international contacts in monastery guest houses or cathedral complexes, where their presence appeared religiously motivated, rather than politically significant. 41. The economic revolution transforming money into power. The medieval economy was undergoing constant transformation throughout the period, and the smartest ladies-in-waiting learned to profit from these changes, while also protecting themselves against economic instability and using their financial resources as weapons in political warfare. Understanding economic systems became crucial for survival, because financial vulnerability made ladies-in-waiting targets for exploitation and manipulation. Those who achieved economic independence had much greater freedom to make political choices based on their own interests rather than immediate survival needs. The luxury economy became increasingly important for ladies-in-waiting, seeking financial independence and political influence. They learned to trade in expensive items like jewelry, fine fabrics, and rare spices. These goods could be easily transported across political boundaries. They held their value across different currencies and could be used effectively as bribes or diplomatic gifts. Some ladies-in-waiting became expert international traders, using their court connections to identify profitable opportunities that weren't available to merchants outside the court system. They had access to information about political developments that could affect trade routes, currency values, and demand for luxury goods. This insider knowledge provided enormous advantages in commercial transactions. They could predict which luxury goods would become more valuable due to political changes, which trade routes might become dangerous or profitable, and which currencies were likely to strengthen or weaken based on military developments or diplomatic negotiations. This predictive capability allowed them to make strategic investments that provided both immediate profits and long-term financial security. Some ladies-in-waiting became expert negotiators and deal-makers, able to arrange complex financial transactions that benefited multiple parties, while advancing their own interests and building useful political alliances. They learned to structure agreements that provided escape clauses, built in protections against betrayal, and created ongoing obligations that would continue to benefit them over many years. These financial skills required understanding not just basic commercial principles, but also human psychology and political dynamics. Successful dealmakers understood what motivated different types of people, had to present proposals in ways that appealed to their counterparts' interests and self-image, and how to structure agreements that made all parties feel they were getting favorable terms. The credit systems of medieval Europe provided both opportunities and dangers for ladies-in-waiting seeking to build financial resources. They could use credit to maintain expensive court appearances without having immediate cash available. But medieval credit was dangerous, with high interest rates, unclear terms, and harsh penalties for default. Based on the medieval credit systems I've researched, ladies-in-waiting could use credit to acquire luxury goods like fine clothing, jewelry, and other necessities for maintaining their status at court. Medieval credit typically involved bills presented after goods or services were supplied, which were then settled by the customer at a later date. This system allowed court women to maintain the expensive appearances required for their positions while managing their cash flow. However, the dangers were significant. Medieval credit often came with high interest rates that were sometimes disguised as fees or penalties for late payment. The terms were frequently unclear or could be altered by creditors. Defaulting on loans could result in imprisonment, loss of property, or complete social disgrace. For ladies-in-waiting whose survival depended on maintaining their reputations and court positions, falling into insurmountable debt could destroy their careers and leave them vulnerable to exploitation by enemies who might offer to pay their debts in exchange for compromising favors or information. The most successful ladies-in-waiting learned to use credit strategically while building backup financial resources and maintaining relationships with reliable lenders who offered fair terms. 46. The credit mastery financial warfare at its peak. The credit systems of medieval Europe provided both opportunities and dangers. For ladies-in-waiting seeking to build financial resources, they could use credit to maintain expensive court appearances without having immediate cash available. But medieval credit was dangerous, with high interest rates, unclear terms, and harsh penalties for default. The most sophisticated ladies-in-waiting learned to navigate these credit systems. Like master chess players, thinking multiple moves ahead, they understood that credit was not just about borrowing money for immediate needs. It was about creating comprehensive financial strategies that could provide both short-term flexibility and long-term security. Medieval banking houses like the Medici or the Fuggers operated complex credit systems that extended across multiple kingdoms. Ladies-in-waiting who understood these international financial networks could access credit in one kingdom while building assets in another. This geographic diversification protected them from political changes that might freeze their assets in any single location. Some ladies-in-waiting became expert credit negotiators, learning to structure borrowing arrangements that included escape clauses and flexible terms. They might negotiate credit agreements that allowed them to suspend payments during periods of political instability, or that provided alternative repayment methods if their primary income sources were disrupted by court changes. The most successful financial strategists learned to use credit as a weapon against their enemies. They might arrange for rivals to be offered tempting credit terms that would eventually trap them in debt, creating leverage that could be used for political purposes. Or they might manipulate credit markets to damage enemies' financial reputations, making it impossible for them to access the resources they needed for political activities. Credit timing became a crucial survival skill. Ladies-in-waiting learned to predict political changes that would affect financial markets. They might borrow heavily just before currency devaluations, allowing them to repay debts with cheaper money. Or they might accelerate asset purchases before wars that would drive up commodity prices dramatically. The psychological aspects of credit relationships were as important as the financial terms themselves. Ladies-in-waiting learned to build personal relationships with bankers and moneylenders that transcended simple commercial transactions. These relationships could provide crucial financial support during emergencies when formal credit systems might be unavailable or too slow to respond. Some developed reputations as absolutely reliable borrowers who always repaid their debts on schedule regardless of circumstances. This reliability became a valuable asset in itself, allowing them to access credit at better terms than other borrowers, and creating financial relationships that could survive political upheavals. The most sophisticated credit practitioners learned to structure their borrowing in ways that created mutual dependencies with lenders. They might arrange for loans that were secured by assets in multiple kingdoms, making it difficult for any single political authority to seize the collateral, or they might negotiate credit arrangements that included profit-sharing provisions, giving lenders incentives to protect the borrower's overall financial success. International credit relationships provided crucial protection against domestic political changes. A lady-in-waiting who owed money to foreign banking houses had additional protection from enemies who might otherwise destroy her, because harming her would damage relationships with international financial institutions. 47. The Master Network Comprehensive Alliance Systems. The ultimate expression of medieval court survival was the creation of master networks that integrated all the various alliance types we've discussed into comprehensive systems that could provide protection and advancement opportunities under virtually any circumstances that might develop. These master networks combine family relationships with religious connections, international contacts, sovereign intelligence systems, economic partnerships, and political alliances into seamless webs of mutual support that could adapt and evolve. As political circumstances changed and new threats or opportunities emerged, the most successful network builders understood that different types of relationships served different purposes. Family connections provided foundational loyalty and support, but they could become liabilities if family members made pro-political choices. Religious relationships offered moral legitimacy and sanctuary, but they could be compromised by theological conflicts or ecclesiastical politics. International contact provided escape routes and alternative opportunities, but they could create suspicions of disloyalty among domestic political authorities. Economic partnerships offered financial resources and independence, but they could make network members targets for economic warfare. Political alliances provided immediate protection and advancement, but they were vulnerable to rapid political changes. The key to building effective master networks was creating redundancy and diversity. Across all these relationship types, a lady-in-waiting might maintain relationships with 3 different religious orders, providing alternative sanctuary options if one became politically compromised. She might cultivate economic partnerships in 4 different kingdoms, ensuring that financial resources would remain available even during international conflicts. Master network builders also understood the importance of creating relationships at multiple levels within each category of alliance. They might maintain connections with foot soldiers and servants, as well as with generals and nobles. This vertical diversity provided intelligence and influence at all levels of political and social hierarchies. The most sophisticated networks included what modern analysts might call sleeper agents. These were relationships that appeared dormant or inactive for years or even decades, but could be activated during emergencies to provide crucial support when it was most desperately needed. Some ladies-in-waiting maintained correspondence with childhood friends who had married into distant noble families. These relationships might seem socially motivated rather than politically significant, but they could provide vital intelligence about developing political situations in remote regions, or offer sanctuary opportunities during times of crisis. Others cultivated relationships with merchants who traveled regularly between kingdoms, but who might not appear to be politically significant to casual observers. These commercial relationships could provide communication channels and transportation assistance that would be available even when official diplomatic relationships were severed. Network maintenance became a full-time occupation for the most successful medieval court survivors. They had to regularly assess and update their relationship portfolios, adding new contacts, while pruning relationships that had become liabilities or were no longer providing adequate value. This maintenance required extraordinary social intelligence and psychological insight. Network builders had to understand what motivated different people, how to provide value to their network contacts, and how to maintain relationships across long periods of time and changing circumstances. The most successful masters developed systems for tracking and managing their networks that were sophisticated beyond anything available to most modern professionals. They might use coded correspondence systems to maintain contact with dozens of allies across multiple kingdoms simultaneously. 48. The historical transformation from survival to dominance. By the late medieval period, the most successful ladies-in-waiting had evolved far beyond simple survival strategies. They had become masters of political manipulation, who could influence the course of international events and shape the development of entire kingdoms. Eleanor of Aquitaine represents perhaps the ultimate example of this transformation from survival to dominance. She served as Duchess of Aquitaine in her own right, Queen of France and Queen of England, using her experiences as a court woman to build influence that spanned multiple kingdoms and decades. Eleanor's ladies-in-waiting learned from her example that survival techniques could be scaled up from personal protection to international influence. The same skills used to navigate dangerous court situations could be applied to managing relationships between kingdoms and influencing the outcomes of military conflicts and diplomatic negotiations. Queen Tamar of Georgia provides another example of how court survival skills could be transformed into tools for building and maintaining unprecedented political power. She ruled over Georgia's golden age using techniques that had originally been developed by women seeking simply to survive in dangerous court environments. The Calm Union, created by Margaret I of Denmark, shows how the networking skills developed by ladies-in-waiting could be used to unite entire regions under single political authorities. Margaret used diplomatic techniques and alliance-building strategies that were fundamentally similar to those used by court women for personal survival, but applied them to international politics and kingdom management. These transformational leaders understood that the same psychological insights that allowed ladies-in-waiting to manipulate individual nobles and courtiers could be applied to understanding and influencing the behavior of entire kingdoms and political systems. The information-gathering techniques that ladies-in-waiting used to collect intelligence about court politics could be scaled up to create international intelligence networks that rivaled anything available to official diplomatic services and military organizations. The reputation management strategies that court women used to protect and enhance their personal standing could be applied to managing the international reputations of entire kingdoms and political institutions. Economic warfare techniques that ladies-in-waiting developed for personal financial protection could be used to manipulate international trade relationships and currency systems for the benefit of entire political entities. These transformation masters also understood that the greatest source of their power lay not in official authority or recognition, but in their ability to operate behind the scenes, influencing events and decisions without appearing to challenge established power structures. They became the powers behind multiple thrones, not because they held official positions of authority, but because they had mastered the art of influence and persuasion to such a degree that they could shape the decisions of those who did hold official power and authority. The most successful transformation masters eventually became so influential that their historical impact extended far beyond their individual lifetimes. They shaped political developments that affected multiple generations of rulers and subjects. Their techniques and strategies became foundational elements of later political and diplomatic systems. 49. The knowledge preservation teaching the unteachable. One of the most remarkable achievements of medieval ladies-in-waiting was their development of systems for preserving and transmitting survival knowledge across generations of court women. This knowledge preservation was particularly challenging because survival techniques were often dangerous to possess and had to be transmitted without appearing to challenge existing power structures or authority systems. The most sophisticated knowledge preservation systems used multiple transmission methods simultaneously to ensure that crucial information would survive even if individual transmission methods were discovered and destroyed by hostile authorities. Mentoring relationships provided the most direct method for transmitting survival knowledge from experienced court women to newcomers who needed to learn quickly. But these relationships had to appear natural and socially appropriate rather than organized. Educational programs that might attract unwanted attention. Successful mentors learned to package dangerous knowledge in forms that appeared innocuous to outside observers. They might teach younger women about herbal remedies, while secretly transmitting information about poisons and antidotes. They could provide instruction in ceremonial protocol, while actually teaching sophisticated political communication techniques and manipulation strategies. Religious instruction provided another camouflage method for transmitting survival knowledge across generations. Mentors could teach about spiritual devotion and moral behavior, while embedding lessons about psychological manipulation, intelligence gathering, and alliance building. within apparently pious discussions about virtue and religious duty. Some ladies-in-waiting became masters of storytelling, using apparently entertaining tales about legendary court women to transmit practical survival information. These stories appeared to be simple entertainment or moral instruction, but they contained detailed information about specific survival techniques and strategies that had been used successfully in historical situations. The storytelling method was particularly effective because it engaged listeners' emotions and imagination, making the survival information more memorable and psychologically compelling than abstract instruction might have been. Written transmission methods were extremely dangerous, but some ladies-in-waiting developed sophisticated coding systems that allowed survival knowledge to be preserved in documents that appeared to contain completely different information. Some wrote what appeared to be religious devotional texts, but embedded survival information in coded language that could be decoded by readers who possessed the appropriate keys and background knowledge. Others created what appeared to be personal correspondence with family members but actually contained detailed survival instructions for future readers. Recipe collections provided another camouflage method for preserving dangerous survival knowledge. What appeared to be simple cooking instructions might actually contain information about poison preparation, antidote creation, or herbal remedies that could be used for various survival purposes. The most sophisticated written preservation systems used multiple layers of encoding and concealment. A single document might appear to contain religious devotional material to casual readers, but actually contain survival information that could be accessed through multiple different decoding methods depending on the reader's level of training and background knowledge. Artistic transmission methods provided additional camouflage for survival knowledge preservation systems. Ladies-in-waiting might commission tapestries or paintings that appeared to depict religious or mythological scenes, but actually contained coded information about survival techniques and strategies. Musical compositions could contain survival information in their structures, rhythms, or lyrical content that would be invisible to casual listeners, but could be decoded by trained recipients who understood the coding systems being used. The most successful knowledge preservation systems created multiple backup methods for ensuring that crucial information would survive even if primary transmission methods were discovered and destroyed. They might use mentoring, relationships, storytelling, written codes, and artistic concealment simultaneously to preserve the same survival information through different channels. 50. The modern application's timeless strategies for contemporary challenges. The survival strategies developed by medieval ladies-in-waiting remain surprisingly relevant for modern professionals facing challenging environments that require exceptional political intelligence and survival skills. Modern corporate environments often contain political dynamics that are remarkably similar to medieval court systems. Office hierarchies can be just as dangerous and unpredictable as medieval noble relationships. Workplace alliances can shift just as rapidly as court political alignments, and economic pressures can create just as much vulnerability and insecurity as medieval financial instability could produce. The information gathering techniques developed by medieval ladies-in-waiting remain extremely valuable for modern professionals seeking to understand and navigate complex organizational politics. The ability to gather intelligence discreetly while maintaining plausible deniability and protecting information sources is just as crucial in modern contexts as it was centuries ago. Network building strategies that medieval court women developed for survival provide excellent models for modern alliance building in competitive environments. The principles of relationship diversification, mutual benefit creation, and long-term maintenance apply just as effectively to modern professional networking as they did to medieval survival systems. The reputation management techniques that ladies-in-waiting used to protect and enhance their standing in court are directly applicable to modern personal, brand building, and professional image management. The ability to control how others perceive you and to reconstruct damaged reputations remains just as important today as it was in medieval courts. Economic warfare strategies developed by medieval court women provide valuable insights for modern financial planning and investment strategies. The principles of resource diversification, risk management, and strategic debt utilization that ladies-in-waiting master for survival can be applied effectively to modern wealth building and financial security planning. Psychological resilience techniques that enabled medieval women to survive constant pressure, betrayal, and uncertainty are extraordinarily valuable for modern individuals facing high-stress, competitive environments. The ability to compartmentalize emotions, regulate responses under pressure, and maintain long-term strategic thinking despite short-term setbacks remains crucial for success in challenging modern professional contexts. The adaptation strategies that ladies-in-waiting used to survive rapidly changing political circumstances are directly applicable to modern professionals who must navigate constant organizational changes, technological disruptions, and shifting market conditions. The ability to remain flexible and responsive while maintaining core strategic objectives is just as valuable today as it was in medieval courts. International networking techniques that medieval court women used to build cross-border alliances and protection systems provide excellent models for modern global professional networking and international business relationship building. The principles remain the same even though the specific technologies and methods have evolved significantly. Crisis management strategies that ladies-in-waiting developed for surviving scandals, accusations, and political disasters are directly applicable to modern crisis, communication, and damage control. The ability to respond quickly and effectively to reputation threats while maintaining long-term strategic objectives remains just as crucial today as it was centuries ago. Leadership techniques that the most successful medieval court women used to influence others without official authority provide valuable models for modern influence and persuasion strategies. The ability to lead from positions of apparent powerlessness remains one of the most valuable professional skills in any era or context. 51. The ultimate victory redefining power itself. The most extraordinary achievement of medieval ladies-in-waiting was not simply surviving in dangerous environments. It was fundamentally redefining what power could look like for women in male-dominated societies. Traditional medieval power was based on official authority, military strength, and inherited titles. Ladies-in-waiting proved that alternative forms of power could be just as effective and sometimes more durable than conventional authority structures. They demonstrated that intelligence and strategic thinking could triumph over brute force and official position, that careful relationship building could create more reliable protection than military strength, and that psychological insight and manipulation could achieve results that direct confrontation never could accomplish. 4 ladies-in-waiting actually became queens of England, but this traditional advancement was not their greatest achievement. Their greatest accomplishment was proving that women could exercise extraordinary influence without ever holding official positions of authority. Catherine de Medici's transformation of her ladies-in-waiting into instruments of state policy represents the ultimate evolution of court survival techniques into comprehensive systems of political control. She maintained 80 ladies-in-waiting, many of whom were allegedly used for political seduction and intelligence-gathering activities. This flying squadron generated enormous scandal throughout European courts, but it also gave Catherine unprecedented political influence over international diplomatic relationships and military conflicts between kingdoms. The most successful masters of medieval court survival eventually transcended individual survival entirely. They became powers behind multiple thrones, influencing political decisions across kingdoms through the networks of former proteges, political allies, and grateful beneficiaries. These women operated international networks that could make or break political careers and reputations, arrange crucial marriages and diplomatic alliances, and even influence the outcomes of military conflicts between entire kingdoms and regions. But perhaps most remarkably, these ultimate masters learned to find genuine satisfaction and meaning in their extraordinary and dangerous lives. Despite all the betrayals, sacrifices, and constant threats, they discovered ways to maintain their essential humanity and personal values while operating in systems designed to crush individual spirit. Their legacy continues to inspire anyone who faces hostile environments where they must create power from apparent powerlessness and refuse to be defined by the limitations that others attempt to impose upon their lives and possibilities. They proved that human intelligence and determination, when fully applied and developed, could overcome seemingly impossible circumstances and obstacles. They transformed medieval courts from places designed for destruction into laboratories for developing extraordinary human capabilities and potential. They showed that true power often lies not in official authority, but in the ability to understand, adapt to, and ultimately transform the systems that attempt to control our lives and limit our possibilities for growth. 52. The eternal lessons, wisdom that transcends time. The survival strategies and achievements of medieval ladies-in-waiting offer timeless lessons about human resilience, adaptability, and the capacity for transformation under even the most challenging and restrictive circumstances. First eternal lesson is that survival in hostile environments requires more than just avoiding immediate dangers. True survival involves transforming challenges into opportunities for growth, influence, and lasting positive impact on the world around you. The second lesson is that apparent powerlessness can be transformed into genuine influence and authority through the strategic application of intelligent relationship building and psychological insight. Those who appear to have no official power can sometimes exercise greater real influence than those who hold traditional positions of authority. The third lesson is that the most effective forms of resistance are often the most subtle. Ladies-in-waiting who challenged oppressive systems most successfully did so not through direct confrontation, but through patient, strategic manipulation of the systems themselves, turning oppressive structures into tools for their own advancement. The fourth lesson is that network building and relationship management are among the most valuable skills anyone can develop, regardless of their official position or apparent resources. Comprehensive alliance systems can provide protection, opportunities, and influence that transcend individual circumstances and limitations. The fifth lesson is that information gathering and strategic intelligence work remain among the most powerful tools available to anyone seeking to understand and influence complex political situations. The ability to see patterns and connections that others miss provides enormous advantages in competitive environments. The sixth lesson is that economic independence and financial literacy are crucial foundations for any other form of security or influence. Those who remain financially dependent on others will always be vulnerable to exploitation and control, regardless of their other capabilities and achievements. The seventh lesson is that reputation management and strategic communication are essential skills for anyone operating in complex social environments. The ability to control how others perceive you and to recover from reputation damage when it occurs can determine the difference between success and failure in virtually any context. The eighth lesson is that psychological resilience and emotional regulation are perhaps the most important survival skills anyone can develop. The ability to maintain clarity and strategic thinking under extreme pressure separates long-term survivors from those who break down when facing adversity. The ninth lesson is that mentoring and knowledge transmission are essential elements of any successful survival strategy. Those who learn valuable techniques have a responsibility to pass them on to future generations who will face similar challenges. The 10th and most important lesson is that human dignity and personal values can be maintained, even in the most oppressive and dangerous circumstances. The medieval ladies-in-waiting who achieved the greatest success were those who found ways to help others while protecting themselves, to maintain their humanity while developing extraordinary survival capabilities. 53. The living legacy: how medieval techniques shape modern success. The influence of medieval ladies-in-waiting survival techniques extends far beyond historical curiosity. They provide foundational models for many aspects of modern professional and personal development strategies. Modern diplomatic services still use relationship building and intelligence gathering techniques that were first developed by medieval court women seeking personal survival. The ability to gather sensitive information discreetly while maintaining multiple international relationships remains central to successful diplomatic work. Contemporary business negotiations often employ psychological manipulation and influence techniques that were pioneered by ladies-in-waiting who needed to persuade powerful men to act in their interests without appearing to challenge male authority. The fundamental principles of strategic influence remain unchanged even though the specific contexts have evolved significantly. Modern crisis management and reputation recovery strategies are direct descendants of the techniques that medieval court women developed for surviving scandals and character assassination attempts. The ability to respond quickly and strategically to reputation threats while maintaining long-term objectives remains just as crucial today. Political campaign management and further influence strategies often use network building and alliance formation techniques that were first systematized by medieval court women seeking to build comprehensive protection and advancement systems. The principles of coalition building remain fundamentally similar across different historical contexts. International business networking and relationship management strategies employ many of the same techniques that ladies-in-waiting used to build cross-border alliances and protection systems. The ability to maintain productive relationships across cultural and linguistic boundaries remains essential for global business success. Modern investment strategies and financial planning approaches often incorporate risk diversification and resource management techniques that were first developed by medieval court women seeking financial independence and security. The fundamental principles of wealth preservation and strategic resource allocation remain applicable across different economic systems. Contemporary leadership development programs often teach influence and persuasion techniques that were originally developed by women who needed to lead without official authority. The ability to inspire and guide others from positions of apparent powerlessness remains one of the most valuable leadership skills in any era or context. Modern psychological resilience training and stress management programs incorporate many of the emotional regulation and mental toughness techniques that ladies-in-waiting developed for surviving constant pressure and uncertainty. The fundamental human psychology that these techniques address remains unchanged over time. Professional networking strategies and relationship management systems used in contemporary business contexts are direct applications of the comprehensive alliance building techniques that medieval court women mastered for survival. The principles of mutual benefit, long-term maintenance, and strategic diversification apply just as effectively today as they did centuries ago. 54. The final triumph: transforming the world itself. The ultimate achievement of medieval ladies-in-waiting was not simply surviving or even thriving in dangerous environments. It was fundamentally transforming those environments and creating new possibilities for future generations of women and men by proving that intelligence and strategic thinking could triumph over brute force and official authority. They expanded human understanding of what power could look like and how it could be exercised. Their example inspired countless later generations of individuals who found themselves in similar situations of apparent powerlessness. By developing comprehensive systems for survival and advancement, they created templates that could be adapted and applied in different historical contexts and cultural situations. Their techniques became foundational elements of later political and social movements that sought to expand opportunities and rights for marginalized groups by maintaining their humanity and personal values while operating in oppressive systems. They proved that individual dignity could be preserved even under the most challenging circumstances. Their example provided hope and inspiration for anyone facing seemingly impossible situations. Their international networking and communication systems helped break down the isolation that had traditionally limited women's influence to purely local contexts. By creating connections across political boundaries, they laid groundwork for later international movements that sought to expand women's rights and opportunities. Their economic strategies and financial independence techniques helped establish precedents for women's participation in commerce and international trade. Their success in building wealth and financial security demonstrated that women could be just as capable as men in managing complex financial situations. Their intelligence gathering and information management systems provided models for later organized efforts to document and preserve women's experiences and achievements. Their understanding of the importance of controlling historical narratives influenced later generations of women who sought to ensure that their stories and accomplishments would not be forgotten or minimized by hostile historians. Perhaps most importantly, they proved that transformation was possible, even under the most restrictive and dangerous circumstances. Their example showed that individuals with sufficient intelligence, determination, and strategic thinking could not only survive oppressive systems, but could actually transform those systems into tools for their own advancement and influence. 55. The endless inspirational legacy for all time. The story of the medieval princesses lady-in-waiting is ultimately a story of human triumph over seemingly impossible odds and circumstances. It demonstrates the victory of intelligence over brute force, of careful strategy over raw circumstance, and of human determination over systems designed to crush the human spirit. These remarkable women faced dangers that would terrify most modern people. They operated in environments of constant betrayal and violence where a single mistake could mean imprisonment, torture, or death. Yet they not only survived, they thrived and ultimately transformed the very systems that sought to destroy them. Their techniques for gathering and using information strategically, building diverse and resilient alliance networks, managing economic resources for maximum advantage, and adapting successfully to rapidly changing circumstances remain as relevant today as they were centuries ago. Their psychological resilience and emotional regulation techniques provide timeless models for anyone facing high-stress competitive environments. Their ability to maintain clarity and purpose despite constant threats and ongoing uncertainty offers inspiration for modern individuals dealing with their own challenging circumstances. Their example of courage in the face of overwhelming danger continues to inspire anyone who refuses to be defeated by circumstances that seem beyond their control. They proved that human resourcefulness, when fully applied, can overcome any obstacle. Their legacy reminds us that true power often lies not in official authority, but in the ability to understand, adapt to, and ultimately transform the systems that govern our lives. They showed that even when offered no official recognition or power, individuals can still create their own sources of influence, and in doing so, change the world around them. The medieval princesses lady-in-waiting represents the ultimate example of human adaptability and resilience in the face of overwhelming adversity. Her story continues to inspire and instruct anyone who faces seemingly impossible challenges in any era or cultural context. She proved that survival is not just about avoiding destruction, it's about transforming challenges into opportunities for growth, influence, and lasting positive impact. She showed that intelligence, properly directed, can be more powerful than any official authority, and that determination, when coupled with strategic thinking, can overcome even the most oppressive circumstances. Her legacy lives on in every person who has ever had to navigate hostile environments, create power from powerlessness, and refuse to be defined by the limitations that others attempt to impose. She remains a timeless symbol of human potential and the capacity for transformation under even the most challenging and restrictive circumstances. In a world that offered her no official recognition, she created her own sources of power. In a system designed to destroy her, she found ways to thrive, and in doing so, she changed that world forever, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire and guide us today. The medieval lady-in-waiting's ultimate victory was proving that the human spirit cannot be broken by any system or circumstance, and that with sufficient intelligence and determination, any individual can transform their world and create lasting positive change for future generations. Her story reminds us that we are all capable of far more than we might imagine, that even in our darkest moments, we possess the potential for transformation and triumph. The medieval princesses, lady-in-waiting, showed us that survival is possible, victory is achievable, and transformation is always within our reach if we have the courage to reach for it. The extraordinary survival strategies of medieval ladies-in-waiting represent just one fascinating glimpse into the complex world of medieval politics and court intrigue. These remarkable women developed techniques for navigating danger that remain relevant centuries later, proving that intelligence and determination can overcome even the most impossible circumstances. Their stories remind us that medieval history is filled with untold tales of courage, cunning, and survival that challenge everything we think we know about the past. You know, researching stories like these is exactly why I fell in love with medieval history in the first place. There's something incredible about discovering that people hundreds of years ago faced challenges that aren't so different from what we deal with today. They just had to be far more creative about surviving them. I spent countless hours digging through historical records, manuscripts, and archaeological findings to uncover these hidden gems of human ingenuity and resilience. If you enjoyed learning about these medieval survival tactics as much as I enjoyed sharing them, I'd really appreciate it if you'd consider subscribing to my channel. I'm constantly uncovering more of these untold stories, from the secret languages of medieval servants to the financial empires built by forgotten businesswomen, from the psychological warfare tactics of medieval queens to the ingenious survival strategies ordinary people used during extraordinary times. There's so much more to explore together, and having you along for the journey makes all the research and late-night manuscript reading absolutely worth it. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next medieval adventure.